Today's guest is Jim Heffelfinger, who is a certified wildlife biologist with degrees in wildlife management from the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, and Texas A&M University in Kingsville. It is not an exaggeration to say that he is most likely the leading expert on deer in the United States. Jim Heffelfinger is a full research scientist at the University of Arizona's School of Natural Resources and the Environment, a professional member of the Boone and Crockett Club, and has worked with the Arizona Game and Fish Department for 31 years, currently as the Wildlife Science Coordinator. He has worked as a biologist for the federal government, state wildlife agencies, universities, and in the private sector in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. For the last 17 years, he has been the chairman of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Mule Deer Working Group, comprised of a mule deer expert from each of the 24 Western states, provinces, and territories. His book, Deer of the Southwest, is the most comprehensive book on deer that I have ever read, which serves as a complete guide to the natural history, biology, and management of the southwestern mule deer and white-tailed deer. Jim is also the lead editor of the forthcoming book, Ecology and Management of Black-tailed and Mule Deer of North America. Aside from these two books, Jim has published dozens of scientific papers, produced over 300 magazine articles and national and regional publications, and has written TV scripts for award-winning outdoor TV shows. He is sought after for podcasts, radio shows, interviews, news reports, and video appearances. I highly encourage you to visit his own website, deernut.com, to learn more about Jim and his incredible contributions in the outdoor and scientific communities. He can also be found on Instagram at servidnut. Jim has been honored with many awards for his outstanding work over the years. Most recently, the Dallas Safari Club selected Jim Heffelfinger as the winner of the 2023 Conservation Trailblazer Award. This award celebrates the monumental contribution of wildlife professionals to the field of game and non-game wildlife conservation, including wildlife and habitat management, applied research, and policy. This award comes on the heels of being named as the National Deer Association's Professional Deer Manager of the Year in 2022. These are just two of the many distinguished awards and honors that Jim has received over his storied career, and certainly not the last. Today, we're going to explore his personal history in the outdoors, as well as his professional journey in all levels of work as a wildlife biologist. Stay tuned and enjoy. Welcome back to the Son of a Blitch podcast. I'm your host, George Blitch, and it is my sincere honor to be joined today with my great guest, Jim Heffelfinger. How you doing today, Jim?
I'm doing great. I'm always doing great.
Nice. That's great to hear. Well, look, I really wanted to start out with kind of getting a little bit of background information, introduction, and how you found your love for the great outdoors. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and maybe what or who influenced you in your love of the great outdoors?
Yeah, it's definitely not a traditional route like most people growing up in a hunting family. I did not. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago until I was through my seventh grade year, and my dad worked for Illinois Bell Telephone, and then he left that job and went up to and bought a hardware store in a small town in southeastern Wisconsin. So I started 8th grade in a small town in Wisconsin after coming from basically the big city with no exposure to outdoors, other than fishing. We did some fishing when I was a kid, but no hunting exposure at all. Never just tromped around in the woods that much. And all of my classmates in 8th grade, they were like taking shotguns out and shooting squirrels out of trees. And I thought, are you kidding me? Your parents let you walk around with a real shotgun in the woods and you just like shoot rabbits and squirrels? That's crazy. So that was really interesting to me. And so my dad in the hardware stores of those days had a little sporting goods section. So we had some Mossberg shotguns and we had some Marlin lever action Model 94s in the case and a little assortment of ammo. And we sold hunting licenses in the small town. So I bought hunting licenses and saved up my money from working in the hardware store and bought a Mossberg 500, a little 20 gauge, and started going out with friends and shooting squirrels out of trees. And I thought that was the coolest thing. And then being in the Midwest, they would come home, they'd go in the crock pot with cream mushroom soup and some rice, because that's the way people cook all wild game in the Midwest. The cream mushroom soup is kind of the glue that holds the Midwest together. And so that was my launching of my experience kind of hunting and being in the outdoors. And that was a small town. That was 8th grade, and then went high school for 4 years there. And actually our high school mascot was a marshman, because I lucked out. My high school town was the only town of 4,000. but it was at the base of the largest freshwater marsh in North America, the Horicon National Wildlife Refuge and the Horicon Marsh. So there's tons of waterfowl stopovers and tons of other wildlife. It wasn't like we were just in dairy farm fields. And so spending all that time out there really got me interested. I just really like spending time outdoors. And then I found out at some point that you could actually do this for a living. You could actually be a wildlife biologist and kind of manage wildlife and manage the outdoors. And I thought that was pretty cool. So that's really what got me kind of directed on this path.
So it sounds you kind of started out mainly with like small game. When did you start actually hunting maybe deer or some larger game there? Is that something that you did in your youth or?
Yeah, we did in high school. We hunted white-tailed deer in the Horicon Marsh. There's plenty of wild areas around the marsh and state land and National Wildlife Refuge. And so we started, but it was a shotgun only area, like a lot of kind of urban areas in the Midwest was. So we're walking around with my 20 gauge Mossberg with some Remington slugs. You know, it wasn't really a wilderness experience, but we hunted big game, and that's really about all there was there in that part of southeastern Wisconsin. There was white-tailed deer, and so that was the big game I had exposure to. And eventually, when I left Wisconsin and went to areas that had a greater diversity of large mammals, it was pretty interesting to have like South Texas wild hogs and javelina and these other things.
So then, what was your kind of introduction into realizing that yes, you can have, you know, a career in that field, and that then you wanted to move into that? How did you make that decision and decide to go after that?
Yeah, I enjoyed being out in the outdoors like that. So at some point, I didn't Google because Google wasn't invented at the time, but at some point I found out that in central Wisconsin was the largest undergraduate wildlife school in the country, right there in the center part of Wisconsin. 2 hours from where I lived was the largest wildlife school. And so did research on that and enrolled in University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and got a degree in wildlife management, a double degree with a major in wildlife and a major in biology. And that launched that part of my career.
So is that something that you went straight into the field working, or did you go straight to graduate? Like, what was your kind of pathway on that?
When I was an undergraduate, I took advantage of every opportunity I could to go help other people, graduate students and other people out in the field, just get experience. And we did all kinds of really interesting things, but I graduated with my bachelor's degree. And at that point, and I was a C student in high school, I didn't think I was college material, and I really didn't think I was going to go to college. And at some point realized that I could probably hack college, and I did. And my first semester as an undergraduate, my grade point average was 2.6, and then it was like 2.67. And then every semester after that, it got progressively better and better as I learned how to study and kind of got into the groove. And then you get in the upper level classes, and they're more wildlife related rather than calculus. And it started doing better and better. And by the time I graduated, I felt like I could probably hack a master's degree. And not only that, but at that time, there weren't a lot of jobs available. And so it really looked like to get a good job, you're going to need a master's degree. And so I started applying for a master's program. And right out of Stevens Point, I worked locally for a guy that was working on researching ways to reduce goose depredation in farm fields around Wisconsin. So I was always working in kind of short jobs like that, but I landed a graduate position at Cesar Claiborne Wildlife Research Institute in Kingsville, Texas, in South Texas, and went down there and did my master's degree on coyote predation on trophy whitetail bucks after the rut. So coming from Wisconsin, where you just have whitetails and maybe pheasants and some ducks, to going down into South Texas and living on a ranch. Right off the bat, I went out and lived in a single wide trailer out in a ranch 30 miles, Freer, Texas, with 30 miles to my east, and Cotulla, Texas, with 30 miles to my west. And I was sitting there in the middle of the brush country underneath a big radio tower in a trailer for 6 months. And that was my first field season, was 6 months. And it was my job to do some other data collecting, but the main thing was to kill as many coyotes as I could in a 10,000 acre pasture of the ranch, because we were studying an area where I removed coyotes. And that's like bailing the ocean in the middle. You go in the middle of the brush country and you design a rectangle on a map and you say, okay, you need to kill all the coyotes there. And so that was my job for 6 months, was trap and use cyanide guns, M44, remove coyotes from that 10,000 acres. And then we had radio collared deer there, and we had radio collared deer in another part of the ranch farther away that had the full coyote density. And so we were comparing mortality rates and buck age structure between a coyote free area and one with coyotes at that time. So coming from Wisconsin, that was a pretty exciting graduate project. All of a sudden, I'm in the middle of scorpions and rattlesnakes and coyotes and wild hogs and javelina and big trophy bucks, giant trophy whitetail bucks. So that was pretty exciting, and that started my love of Texas, actually. And I've always kind of kept one foot in Texas since then.
Well, I remember seeing a picture that you had posted not too long ago on Instagram where you had a snake skin that you had done. Was that one of your times in Texas there?
That the trailer I'm talking about is the one that's in the background there. And so my major professor then taught me, being out there remote, not having any money, not being able to just go to the store very easily. He taught me how to take a rattlesnake, skin it, staple it flesh up on the board, and paint it with truck antifreeze. For a week or two, and that glycerin in the antifreeze then tans the hide. And then actually, I didn't mention in the post, but then when it's tanned, we just take some clean motor oil and paint motor oil on it and to get it a little more flexible. So I learned a lot of things in graduate school, and things like that were really useful.
Absolutely. No, that I know that area well. I mean, my family kind of helped settle the area in South Texas. And we've had a ranch there for 5 generations, and it's for those who don't realize, like, that terrain is real tough, man. If it's not poking you, scratching you, trying to bite you, you're not really there. Everything there is thick.
Yeah, we had gumbo clay. I think over where you're at, it's more sandy soil, but we had some nasty black, greasy gumbo clay that made it. Even with 4-wheel drive, you could have all 4 tires spinning on top of not even be bogged down, but have it spinning on top of the grease.
I've sunk it to the axles before. Yeah. No, and you don't even know, and it will stay like that for a while, because that area doesn't get a lot of rain, and when it does, it's just it can be treacherous driving for sure.
Yeah. So I had 2 study areas. One was the Cameron Ranch where I lived there between Freer and Cotulla. Second study area is the Faith Ranch by Carrizo Springs, which you're familiar with because that's right in your neighborhood. And so I lived on the Cameron Ranch. There was another graduate student that lived on the Faith Ranch, and he was doing the same thing. He was trapping coyotes in part of the ranch, leaving coyotes alone in the other part of the ranch. And then I was collecting data for him, and he was trapping coyotes for me. And so both graduate students just had different places to live, collecting data for each other, and then we each analyzed our own data. And I worked on coyote predation and trophy bucks, and he worked on carrying capacity of white-tailed deer in both ranches. So I'd go to the Faith Ranch about once a month and hang out with him and do stuff together on that ranch.
What were some of the results of those studies, like as far as on your side of things?
Right. My study, we wanted to look and see that, could you come into a ranch and could you just really kill the snot out of coyotes? And would that make a difference in your buck-to-doe ratio? Would it make a difference in your buck age structure? Would it make a difference in buck mortality rates? Because we knew from experience, everybody knew at that time, that after the breeding season, those big trophy bucks in South Texas, they exist at almost a 1-to-1 buck-to-doe ratio. They have an older age structure, and that creates a lot of competition for does. So during the breeding season, it's a lot of fighting, a lot of running does, a lot of competition. And after the breeding season, that post-rut period, those bucks were really worn out, and they would lay low. They would not do anything because they would lose. Some studies showed they lose up to 20% of their body weight during rut. So it's an intensive period of time for them. And then at the same time, you have these really dense coyote populations where you have last year's pups still hanging around the parents because densities are so high, it's hard for them to disperse and find their own territories. So you really kind of had coyote packs, almost like wolf packs. And when you had that many coyotes together, they could drag down these big mature bucks after the rut because they were so worn out and couldn't defend themselves and couldn't run as well. And so you had this little ecosystem where you had these little packs of coyotes like wolves running down the biggest and strongest, most mature bucks after the breeding season, because those were the bucks that were most vulnerable. The young bucks running around hadn't done much rutting, and they were in good shape.
Right.
And so it was really a kind of a counterintuitive thing where the coyotes were killing the most mature buck. So everybody knew that was going on. So can we kill coyotes off your ranch, or in the study design, part of the ranch? And does that make a difference in increasing buck mortality, buck survival rates? Does that increase the survival of those mature bucks after the rut? We found out that if you kill the snot out of coyotes like I did, I mean, this was really intensive in that 10,000 acre area, you'll save a few bucks. But from a population level, you won't even notice it in your surveys. You won't notice a more mature age structure. Even the radio collared deer where we're monitoring mortality rates, we didn't detect a significant difference in mortality rates between a place without coyotes and a place with coyotes. mortality rates were higher where there were coyotes, and we did save some bucks, but it was not significant. It was just a kind of a subtle difference. So the bottom line is, with all of the effort and all of the money you would spend killing coyotes for a 6-month period on your ranch, and that was like in the wintertime past the breeding season, it's not going to pay off. It's not going to be worth it. You're better off letting the coyotes take a couple of those mature bucks.
So one question I've had that you might be able to have some answers with, or kind of point me in that direction, is that I've been told before is like whenever you kind of kill a certain amount of coyotes, that there's a kind of a vacuum that all of a sudden you're having it's like they just get replaced. And sometimes the more you take out, the more that can come into that area. And I understand the competition and things too. And I know it has a lot to do in some cases and places with, rainfall, how much small game is there for them. And, if they're going to go after, whatever it is. But I was just always kind of curious about that, because I read a book or a study once or a section of the book that kind of talked about that. And I didn't know if that was true. And I figured maybe you might be the person who might have some authority on that.
You'll get a typical biologist answer with that. And that is, it depends.
Yeah.
And like you said, it depends. There are a lot of rabbits that year, a lot of rodents that year as what we call buffer species. And in my study, I was trapping rodents and getting an idea of we call them buffer species, of how much buffer species were out there at that time, because that's part of the mix. So to answer your question, that 10,000 acre that I was bailing the ocean, I mean, I was trapping coyotes out of, it was a 6-month period, and you could see the first, second, third month, coyote population started going down. They got to a low level. And then after about 3 months, the next 3 months of my coyote trapping, I was just killing coyotes that were coming into the area. They were filling that vacuum. They were coming into that area constantly. But I was continuing, for our research purposes, I was continuing to kill them. So we did have a coyote-free area for most of that 6 months. But they do definitely soak in. Those coyotes are looking for a vacant territory, and you start killing coyotes, then they found it. They come into that area. The other part of that you said, though, is whether reproduction can increase if you start killing coyotes and lower the density. And you can, but it does depend on whether there's enough resources for them. The only time that happens, and it would happen frequently in South Texas probably, the only time that happens is if they're at the carrying capacity of their habitat. They're like limited by territories, they're limited by food. And it's only under those conditions that when you remove some of the population, then there is more food for the remaining animals, and they might be healthier and they might have bigger litters. You have to be careful, though, because a lot of protectionist groups will hang their hat on that. They'll use that and say, see, that's why you should never kill a predator, because it doesn't make any difference. And that's not entirely true. It just all depends on the situation. So sometimes it will increase reproduction and kind of compensate for those removals. But it's not like a blanket reason why we can't ever do predator control. We can do predator control in some certain situations.
And that's something that we have, I have 2 ranches in my family. And at one, we definitely find, definitely in the spring, a lot of fawns that are being chased, whether we see it on camera, in person, by coyotes. And, there's some years where it just seems like it is the slightest fawn survival rate. But as I was kind of reading your book and about fawn survival rate is already kind of at low numbers each year. It's and so we were trying to figure of, can we maybe be able to enhance that? Is there anything that we can kind of do aside from, in Texas too, we have times of droughts. We always have, water and different things that will fill up, basins and things and maybe have supplemental food and kind of help get shelters. Or we've done a lot where we've taken out an invasive species of plants and, replanting some of the grasslands and forbs that are native to that area to try to help, with that. But I mean, sometimes it feels like there's not much that we can do. It's nature's going to kind of take its course there.
Yeah. All that habitat improvement stuff you're doing is allows your deer population to be more resilient when it comes to drought and to weather those swings in good and bad times. If you've got kind of crappy habitat, you get hit by a drought, and that deer population, the adult mortality goes through the roof. A lot of adults are dying. A lot of the adult does that are producing fawns are dying. You get zero recruitment, and your population will really decline. So you can, and then you get rainfall, and there's forbs everywhere, and deer population comes up. And you can moderate that by providing really good quality habitat with habitat improvements. That's certainly what you want to do. But you're right. Half of the fawns, or most fawns, you could probably say most fawns die every year. And people kind of envision, I think, that every fawn that's born dies and some small percentage dies from disease and coyotes eat a bunch. But truthfully, that's just nature's way. They produce an excess every year, and then most of those die off. And the reason that nature does that is that in those good years, most of those fawns can live, and that population can increase. In poor years, more of those fawns are going to die. So it's a way for deer populations to kind of stay within the carrying capacity of the habitat. But it doesn't make any sense to me to be killing the snot out of does to reduce your density so that you have bigger bucks and more nutrition to your bucks, and then at the same time complain about coyotes taking fawns, because all they're doing at that point is they're helping you. So you shouldn't be trapping coyotes because they're killing fawns and then shooting a whole bunch of does, because you're working against yourself. And so I always considered the fawn mortality, unless your population is below carrying capacity and it's recovering from a drought, then you might want to give the population a boost if it's your private ranch. But if you're killing does because you have too many deer, then it doesn't make any sense to be killing coyotes because they're helping you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think it's tough. Like we have like wildlife management programs on both ranches. Obviously, there's a lot of tax deferrals in Texas and some other states too that people take advantage of there too. And we're always in touch with our wild game biologists, and we're sending in data as far as as you're very familiar, as far as game cameras and in-person counts, and we're doing that, and we might have a number that they're saying, okay, based on this year and these ground conditions, here's what we suggest you take. And and I think that a lot of folks, when they think about game management here, and especially in Texas too, a lot of folks are thinking about, we're trying to get the biggest trophy, biggest antler deer, and it's like, I'm just trying to create the most successful habitat for all of our native wild games. Because as you mentioned before, we have a lot of non-natives. We got the invasive species of feral hog here in Texas at an alarming rate. And we're always trying to do the best for our the indigenous animals of this area.
Yeah.
And even when you kind of think about like that idea of managing for larger antlers and such too, it's like I always felt like it's kind of maybe a misunderstood thing. People are taking like, we're going to take this smaller buck out. This is a cull, but it's, you still have the doe and you don't know what their genetics are. So you're never going to fully be able to manage that unless you're in a high fence and all the genetics. I mean, that pretty safe to assume that.
Yeah. There's two big studies that have come out of Cesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute where they really culled deer super intensively. I mean, they were like ruthless when it came to an animal that like wasn't symmetrical or something. They were ruthless. And there's one on the King Ranch and there's another one that another student did, and both of them showed the same thing. You can't influence the genetics of a population, a free-ranging population. If you've got breeder pens and you're gathering up most of the does on your place, putting them in pens with specific bucks. Now that's animal husbandry. You can change genetics that way. Sure. I mean, our domestic livestock industry has shown, and our pet dogs shows that you can change what an animal looks like with the correct breeding. So there's no doubt. But free ranging population, you can't shoot spikes. You can't shoot some small 8.3-year-old and change the genetics of the population. And when you talk about everybody focusing on big bucks, I always thought it was interesting that I was the manager of wildlife operations. After my graduate school, I got a job as a biologist running the manager of wildlife operations for Horlock Land and Cattle in Brooks County, just west of Falfurrias, and was there for about a year and a half. And during that time there, I thought it was interesting. We had 10,000 acres that were high fence, and that was at a time where not everybody was high fence like now. Right. I drive across South Texas and I was shocked. It used to be that people would talk about, that one high fence place over by Cotulla, and everybody go, yeah. That's
the landmark, right?
And now people probably say, that place is not high fence, and everybody would say, yeah, that one. I know where that is. It's really amazing. But we did have 10,000 acres high fence. Actually, we had 9,000 acres high fence because the other 1,000 acres of the 10,000 acre ranch was along the highway, and that was planted in coastal Bermuda grass. And the cattle rotated through this coastal Bermuda grass by the highway to show everybody how beautiful these cattle were. And the 9,000 acres behind it, no cattle were allowed, which wasn't good either, but that was by edict of the guy who owned the ranch. So we had 9,000 acres that was just wildlife, and 1,000 acres that was cattle in the front. And that 9,000 acres was just wild brush country that the focus was, how do we produce the healthiest wildlife habitat back there? And so some people complained about the South Texas model, where people might come in for 3 days, sit by a corn feeder in a blind, shoot a trophy buck, and then go back to Iowa. And that's not something that a lot of the general public in America really thinks is great, and it thinks is really hard hunting. But what that does, the money from those people coming in paying $5,000 for 3 days, that money is what allows that rancher to take 90% of his ranch and devote it to wildlife management. And so if you didn't have a corn feeder and a blind where you could get a guy a big trophy buck in 3 days, then you wouldn't have $5,000 per person flowing into that ranch to just manage wildlife. So even if people find that distasteful, that someone would shoot a deer over corn, and I don't, I do it every year. But even if someone would find that distasteful, think about the bigger picture of 90% of the ranch being managed only for wildlife. And that's what drives it, is being able to swoop in, sit in a blind for 3 days and shoot a big buck and go home.
No, it's a great point. And I think that's, I think our population of hunters in the United States, I think it's probably around 5%. Isn't that close to around the numbers? So, you got 95% who may have some familiarity or none with the processes involved there too. And something like that you're saying. And I think it, like, kind of on a macrocosmic level too, I know that you get pictures of people who have, a lion or an elephant or something, and they've gone into Africa and they're trophy hunting in that sense. And I feel like, there's a lot of folks don't realize also that person might have paid $25,000, $30,000. That money it goes and spreads across that community. A lot of the times the meat is for the local people there too. And it allows them to be able to sustain those types of situations where they're managing that wildlife. And I think that a lot of times people don't hear that part reported as well. And, and I'm not necessarily saying that I support or I'm going to go do that. I don't go big game trophy hunting. I mean, I literally, I've been hunting since 91, and I just got the largest largest buck that I've ever shot at my ranch in South Texas this year. And most of the ones that you see me taking each year, they don't have antlers. I'm just filling freezers, and occasionally I'll have one. We have a lot of bucks out there that they don't grow brow tines. They're just slick.
Oh, I heard that on your podcast. Yeah,
tons of that.
That's interesting.
So a lot of times we've that might be okay. Well, there's one that, we got to have our certain amount of bucks. Well, that counts as one. I'm not waiting the whole time, and sometimes going home with an empty cooler to try to get one that I can put on the wall. It's really a matter of feeding my family, and that's the idea of a trophy. To a lot of people are the biggest rack on the wall. To me, it's that trophy is the experience and what it is that I can do and cook with my family and friends and things like that too. So it's
there can be local genetic local areas that have kind of a unique genetic thing that shows up. I've seen a ranch with double brow tines, and they show up so often that it's not just random. There's got to be some local genetic influence of double brow tines. Your missing brow tines might be that sort of thing too, as long as they're not like, whitetails almost always have brow tines. So if you're missing brow tines on a lot of deer, that might be a local genetic. You're probably not going to shoot the brow tines back on your deer. By shooting right there. But if you're going to shoot deer and put venison in the freezer anyway, then who cares? Yeah. I love the idea of management bucks to improve the genetics, not because it's going to improve the genetics, but because that usually means my kids can shoot some bucks, and I can put some bucks in the freezer. It's not really going to change the genetics. But the Heffelfinger family has always said, if it's big enough to fit in a tortilla, it's big enough to go home with us, and that's kind of that's our threshold. That's our slot limit. If it'll fill a tortilla, it'll go home with us.
How big are the tortillas in Arizona? Are they pretty large?
The Sonora tortillas are known for being very big. Yeah, they are very big and very see-through. They say you can read a newspaper through a Sonoran tortilla because they're so thin and have so much lard in them. Actually, that's what makes them transparent.
So that was actually a question I was going to ask you, and I guess now's a good time. How many animals are you putting in your freezer? Like your personal, I know you hunt with your family, and I just saw a recent picture
Yeah.
with, 3 generations of your family, but as far as your own personal, what are you taking every year, and what do you kind of normally hunt? And, are there any
Yeah.
hunts that you do or that you had this last year, this upcoming year that may be, different than your norm that you're looking forward to or that you had?
Yeah, we put in for usually in Arizona is a lottery style draw for everything. And there's a lot of people in Arizona and there's limited resource, a limited opportunity to go. And so you put in like for elk, you put in for the draw. And we normally, because we're not looking for a big 6x6 bull, we just want some time spent in the field.
Right.
3 generations walking around in the woods around Flagstaff for a week. That's pretty awesome. So we put in for December cow tags is what we normally put in for elk. And then about every 3 years or so, we'll get a cow tag and we'll go up there and have a great time. I've killed a spiked bull. We've had a few bull hunts that we put like a bull hunt for the first choice, and then your other, if you don't get drawn for that, it rotates down and you hopefully will get one of your other choices. So mostly cow elk in December. Pronghorn we put in for. I've been here 31 years. Pronghorn in southern Arizona, they're small populations. It's between 1 and like 3% chance of getting drawn. So you got 33 to 100 years before you're going to get drawn for one of our units down here. But I don't want to go 8 hours to the Grand Canyon, so I've always put in just locally, and if I get one, I get one. The second year I put in, I actually got a pronghorn tag, which was remarkable at 2% draw rate. And I killed a nice pronghorn, put it on the wall. I applied every single year for 22 years or 23 years, and I got my second tag at the time. And that year, I already had a pronghorn on the wall. That year, my son didn't get drawn for any deer. He didn't get, one of my 4 sons didn't get a deer tag. And so I transferred that tag, which you can do in Arizona, transfer that tag to my son, and he shot a pronghorn
Awesome.
that year. But so it's not, so pronghorn hunting isn't like Wyoming with where you go shoot does and we shoot only bucks. And so we try to hunt pronghorn, but it doesn't happen very often. We hunt javelina every year. As the kids have gotten older, they're kind of like, I'm not that excited about javelina. But my dad and I, he'll turn 90 this year. He and I go out every year he hunts deer, he hunts elk when we get drawn. He hunts javelina every year with me. So we hunt javelina. And javelina meat, for years, we made green chili, shredded green chili, burritos. We make shredded barbecue. And then about 5-6 years ago, a graduate student at the university gave me a recipe for chorizo using hand ground spices, and so I started making javelina chorizo with just the pure javelina meat. They don't really have any fat,
Right.
so the javelina meat, and then I add pork fat for the fat, and made this chorizo. And instead of javelina being the last out of the freezer, when everything else is gone, that chorizo's first out of the freezer, and we'll have potato and egg and chorizo burritos for supper. And I love javelina chorizo. So it's turned it from being an okay meat to something that's relished by our family.
Well, I'm gonna have to get that recipe. I've had some amazing javelina meals. And I think a lot of people, I don't know if it's maybe, they touch that scent gland and they smell like the javelina for a month or something like that, or they basically, and I've seen a lot of folks that just kind of dismiss the idea. And I had a friend, Matthew Mitchell, who's a co-host on a lot of my podcasts, and he got a javelina last year, and he made some tacos. And I remember he brought them over, and my wife, who was not really all excited about the idea of it, she had it, and she's like, when can we get another javelina? And in Texas we're allowed 2 a year, and we have a bunch. I mean, we always see them out there, and it's turned into something that we really enjoy. And speaking of chorizo, I'm ahead, and I got a couple feral hogs this past hunting season. I mean, I still am in it. We have a managed lands deer program, MLD here, so we have kind of extended until the end of February. So I'm going out here again soon, but maybe try to get a couple more things in the freezer. But I got a couple hogs, and on the way back, I was picking up some meat from a deer processor. I dropped off part of my deer, and I was like, "Hey, you guys do some chorizo, I hear." So I dropped off half of that hog to try that.
Yeah.
Normally I just cook it myself, but I was like, "It can't beat a good chorizo, man." So
that is good. My wife seems to have a cuteness slot limit when it comes to wild game. Like rabbits are kind of a little too cute to eat, and javelina are kind of a little too ugly to eat. And so, deer and some of these other things in the middle are pretty good. But we eat almost nothing but wild game. And what allows us to do that is the deer tags are on lottery style draws. So we get drawn almost every year. We go out and we hunt. It's not easy to get a deer in free ranging South Texas. It's spot and stalk. You sit on the hill. Deer densities are low because we're talking about desert mule deer. We're talking about a desert environment. You don't have the nutrition, the productivity.
You mentioned South Texas. You mean South Arizona or South?
Yes, thanks for the correction.
Okay,
yes,
yeah,
Southern Arizona is what I'm talking about. I'll get to South Texas next, but we're hunting Southern Arizona in the desert mule deer, and deer densities are low, and so you sit up and you glass for several days, and it's not easy to get a deer. We filled 2 tags out of 4 this year. But what I like is I've got a couple friends in South Texas that have an MLD place, and so they've got tags through February, and so for the last probably 5 years. I've been going down with them, and we just go out one day. I'll drive down to South Texas. The next day we go out to the ranch. I shoot 4 deer before lunch. We take those deer back. We hang them up. We have fajitas, and then we go butcher them in the afternoon, at least quarter them, and take them home. And then the third day, my son was a graduate student at Caesar Clayburgh for a number of years, just finished his PhD a year ago. We'll butcher all of those deer, and he'll shoot a couple, and I'll shoot 4. I bring my vacuum sealer. He's got a vacuum sealer. We vacuum seal steaks and roasts and a bunch of cut meat for grinding for burger later. And then we'll put them in the freezer. And then we'll go duck hunting or something. And then the next day, I pack all of those frozen packages of meat in a big cooler and drive back to Southern Arizona. So I get the best of both worlds because I can hunt with my family and not worry too much about getting a deer, just enjoy the experience. And then a couple of weeks later, go fill the freezer packed with venison.
So I hear a lot about, critters walking around. Are you doing any fishing as well? And in your time, or are you just mainly,
I don't much. I love fishing. I got a bunch of fishing poles in the garage. Grew up fishing a little bit. I don't, we're in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, so it's not like you just kind of run out back to the pond and catch some largemouth. But I trapped deer. I was a deer researcher at Mississippi State University right after my graduate project. So I worked for Mississippi State University, and I had 18 study areas throughout the state of Mississippi where I was capturing deer, radio collaring them, ear tagging them, starting up a statewide buck mortality study. And in the process of that, I had a fishing pole behind the university truck seat with a bag of, I just had rubber worms, and I just used rubber worms for bass. And when I was done trapping deer about 10 in the morning, most of the deer activity had died down. I'd go to the nearest water hole, and there was always one everywhere. Yeah. And I'd catch giant largemouth bass in these little bayous and sloughs, and I love that. But in the last 10 years or so, I just haven't fished much. It's hard to do everything. If I've got a weekend where I want to go do something fun, I like to shoot pistols competitively, and there's always pistol matches, and that's really a passion of mine. So that takes up a lot of my time that might otherwise be quail hunting or fishing or something.
Sure. Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So when did you get into competitive pistol shooting, and kind of walk maybe through, for folks who might not know what that means, and maybe kind of give us a general idea of, what happens when you stepped into this match and how that goes down.
Yeah, I was when I was living on the Cameron Ranch as a graduate student, I wanted to have a pistol, so I bought a pistol, and I had never had a pistol. I'd never even shot a pistol. It was completely new to me, and I bought one at the local pawn shop in Kingsville and had it out there and started shooting a pistol. I thought that was pretty interesting, pretty fun. I started reading more about that. I ended up getting another pistol, and then I think soon after I left South Texas, I bought a stainless steel Colt 1911 because I was really interested in that. And then I found out, rather than just going to the range and standing there and shooting a paper target, which can be kind of boring, there's actually matches where you can run around and you're running and reloading and shooting, and these action pistol matches. And so I started looking into that. In Mississippi, in the year and a half I was there, I would about once a month drive 2 hours to Jackson, Mississippi to shoot a match, and 2 hours back. That's how bad I really wanted to do it. And that's how infrequent matches were at that time. And now eventually, when I ended up in Arizona, this is the epicenter of action pistol shooting. That there's world champions, a lot of the national champions, the well-known people live in Phoenix and Tucson because they can shoot year round, in great weather. And so really lucky that there's a lot of pistol matches and a lot of well-known people around there. And so I just started shooting local weekend matches, and yeah, I just loved it. I just had to buy a reloader then because you can't afford to buy factory ammo to shoot in competitions. And now I do whenever I can. It's really is my thing that's away from work. And a lot of the people that shoot pistol matches are not hunters. they're just gun people and they like to shoot pistol matches. So it's really fun for me to go to a pistol match, kind of take my watch off, put it in the range bag, take my phone, put it in the range bag, and then just for a half a day or for 3 or 4 hours or a full day on a big match, to just focus on something that's enjoyable. And a lot of the people, most of the people don't hunt, so they're not asking me, hey, how come the Game and Fish Department's doing this? And how come you guys are doing this? It's just time away to do something really fun. And that's what I really enjoy it. So I've gotten through the years, I've gotten a lot of plaques at a couple state championships, but really I have to temper that by saying they were in kind of lower divisions. There's not like, so you say you were state champion that year, that sounds like a really big deal, but they were really lower divisions of shooting and not really the best of the best.
Could you walk me through the idea of what is these various divisions? Is this, as far as like the ranking, or how does that come down to where they differentiate?
Yeah, so there's different disciplines. There's one called IDPA, which is International Defensive Pistol Association, and that you wear a vest, you cover your firearm so you can't see it, and then you have to draw from concealment. Your gun's concealed, and the scenarios like the set of targets that are set up, they're simpler, lower round count, and they're supposed to be more like practical self-defense situations. And so that's IDPA, and I started out shooting that. And I've kind of migrated to shoot a lot more USPSA, and USPSA is United States Practical Shooting Association, but it's evolved so that it's anything but practical. It's running and gunning and shooting a lot, and it's really fun. It's not real practical unless you're in some kind of terrorist situation, but it's super fun. You'll have a maximum of 32 rounds in a stage, and you have maybe 4 or 5 stages on a weekend, or a big match like the one I'm going to shoot in Phoenix on Saturday. There'll be 10 stages. So each stage you walk up, everybody has unloaded guns until you shoot. You load up your gun under the direction of the range officer. He says, load, make ready. You load, you put it back in the holster. You don't have any concealment. You've got what they kind of call you've got a gun belt that's designed for drawing as fast as you can and getting reloads off it as fast as you can, not for anything practical that you would carry around. And they have a timer, and the buzzer goes off, and that's your start. And then you'll have to shoot. You'll have a stage that you'll have to run through, staying within the boundaries, run through and shoot 2 shots per target, up to about 16 targets, sometimes steel targets, sometimes reactive targets where they're moving, sometimes what's called a Texas Star, which is 5 round plates. And you hit one and it imbalances it and it starts spinning, and you have to knock the other ones off it. So it's a lot of action, a lot of running and reloading in between shooting positions. And so the scoring then is, you don't just put 2 holes in the paper target, but there's actually perforated scoring rings in it. So you have to be accurate. You have to hit the middle scoring zone to get the most points. So it's a balance of how fast can you shoot it accurately. It's a balance between speed and accuracy. And that's what makes it fun, because you're just running right on the ragged edge of being able to get kind of decent scores, but doing it super fast and through window ports and underneath things. And it's a blast.
That's a lot of fun, man. I definitely want to do some competitive shooting someday, just for the experience of getting out on a course and doing that. We're actually going to be setting up here in a couple of weeks, more of a pistol range at our ranch in Central Texas. We got some long distance stuff for rifles, but that's something I definitely want to move into a little bit more. Now I got a reloader for pistols, so it's something that, it can be a little bit more affordable as a hobby, when you have the reloader. Because like you said too, there's a certain point where it's just, I mean, what is your savings? Is it like a third when you're reloading?
Well, they joke that you don't really save money when you reload. You just shoot a lot more, and that's kind of true. You're still spending a lot of money on ammunition components, but I don't know if you're really saving money. And because I like pistols so much, that I've started hunting with pistols. I've got one that's a XP1. It's a Remington XP100, which is really, it's got a 15-inch barrel and it's bolt action, but it has a pistol grip in the middle of it. So it's kind of a cross between a handgun and a rifle. Some people jokingly call those a handful, because it's a handgun and a rifle. It's a handful, and it's chambered in 7mm bench rest. So it's like a rifle, mini rifle cartridge. So I've got that to hunt with, but I also have built 2 Glocks, one in 10mm with a red dot on it, the red dot they call an RMR, where you look through it. It doesn't project a red dot. Is you look through it. And then another one, I built a large Glock and a 460 Roland. That only some of the gun geeks would probably know what that is, but it's basically a 45 ACP that's longer.
Right.
And you can load them to 44 Magnum power. And so I'm basically hunting with a Glock that's chambered in something that's the same as a 44 Magnum. And I've shot a deer in South Texas with the 10 millimeter and the 460 Roland.
Is that the G40?
No. Well, the 10 millimeter is a G40 with a longer barrel on it. The,
the 6-inch
460 Roland it's the same frame as a G40. The 460 Roland is the large frame Glock that they use for 10 millimeter and 45. But the upper I bought from another person. It's a long 6-inch slide with a 6.5-inch barrel. And with a 460 Roland, it's so powerful, you have to have a compensator on it to reduce the slide velocity. If you don't have a compensator on it, the slide slams back so hard that it ruins the gun. And so you have to slow that slide down by putting a compensator on the end. So it's kind of fun because you shoot it and the recoil's not bad and the brass just kind of pops out, not very far, but you're shooting a lot of power.
I ended up picking up a G40, the 10 millimeter. It was probably close to about a 250, 275 pound hog that my brother-in-law had shot, and he found a little bit of blood, but it didn't really have the greatest flashlight at the time. And so we kind of came back to the house, and then we all went out there and we're walking. All of a sudden it stood up, and it would look like a Volkswagen. This thing was just massive. And we all just drew and started firing. And it didn't. My brother-in-law who had a 45, his jammed, and so the only two guys who were shooting, we had 9 millimeter. We had shot it multiple times, and that thing it seemed like they were just bouncing off him. And I started kind of doing some research, and I realized that when I saw, because I have a 45 as well, but I started looking at some of the ballistics and everything about a 10 millimeter, and I decided I'd give that one a run. And so that's kind of like what stays on my hip. And we've had a few encounters where we've been charged, once by javelina, and I was able to pull it out and fire. And that was the first time I realized that really having a sidearm for that event is a very important thing. And just like that, I could actually do that in a defensive situation, because I hadn't really trained for that much. I've kind of done some quick draw things and just for practice, but boy, that after that, it was just like, okay, this is going to be on my hip. And then, as you know, in South Texas, we definitely have a lot of times where we have folks coming across our property that have come across the border. And primarily it's been, folks who are looking for better life. And then now we're seeing a lot more where there's, folks who are smuggling people. There's people who have, 25 to 30-year-old guys with big old square duffel backpacks, and that, just clothes and supplies. It's a lot of times drugs that are coming across. And we had one guy who that was working on our property, and he spoke Spanish, and he heard those guys talking about how they were going to take him and take his truck. And he alerted them, hey, by the way, I do speak Spanish, and I do have a pistol on my side, and you might want to think twice. And they went the other way, and Border Patrol was called. But, having those kinds of situations, it's like anytime I'm out there at either the ranch, I'll have something on me. Not that I plan to ever use it or anything like that, but it's that was that reason for moving up to a 10 millimeter after that Volkswagen of a hog didn't go down very easily. I was like, I need something a little bigger here, not just my SIG 365. That's my, every day.
I ran into some drug smugglers in southern Arizona this year, which we've been hunting by the border for 30 years. And we see trains of drug smugglers, not trains, but, groups of drug smugglers in a group. And this year, I thought there were hunters coming up to the hill that we were glassing on. So I was standing in plain view and was going to flag them off and say, we're up here. You don't need to come up here because we're up on the hill. And then it was too late. They were about 40 yards away from me before I just registered that this group of 7 guys had identical camo baseball caps, identical camo little square backpacks. And it used to be that they'd carry marijuana bales, but now you just go downtown to the dispensary and get your marijuana. So there's not a lot of that anymore.
Right.
And it used to be that the smaller backpacks, that we have everybody with an identical backpack, though they're outfitted by a cartel. It used to be that was like cocaine or heroin. And the Border Patrol tells me now it's mostly fentanyl what they're moving across there. And so here I am 40 yards away, and there's this group of drug smugglers on the hill, like the side, they were side hilling the hill we were glassing off of. And the first guy, we kind of recognized each other at the same time. He cleared this mesquite tree and he stopped abruptly, and I'm standing there, and luckily my rifle was on the other side of the hill, because my dad and my son were on the other side of the hill, glass on the other side. And I've got my, I had a 9mm that was underneath my binocular case, so it wasn't visible, which when I'm out there, I always have a pistol on me.
Sure.
But I like it to never be visible. I like it to be where it's easily accessible, but not like real visible, so people don't know that I'm armed, but I am. And so it was beneath my binocular case, so that was okay. And so he stopped abruptly, eyes got real big, and I just gave him a big smile and a big thumbs up, and I waved him north. Go on. Good luck. Good luck. I didn't want to start yelling, and what little Spanish I know, I thought yelling in Spanish is probably a bad idea, because who knows, they could misinterpret whatever I'm saying.
Sure.
Or I could say manos arriba or something, and then there's a gun battle. So I just smiled, gave him a big thumbs up and waved him on, and he smiled and he gave me a big thumbs up and started walking. And then every person that cleared that mesquite tree looked at me and gave me a big smile and a big thumbs up. But I'm kind of, when I see drug smuggling, when I see illegal activity in southern Arizona, when I'm deer hunting, it's kind of like it's not my job. I'm deer hunting. The last thing I want is a big team of Border Patrol swirping around, helicopter overhead, over the hill we're glassing on. We have a couple days to deer hunt. Right. I don't want a big Border Patrol operation. And so when I'm out there hunting and I run into them, mostly for safety reasons for me, I'm not going to confront them. I'm not going to get on my cell phone and so they can see I'm calling them in.
What are you doing?
So you just smile and give them a thumbs up and just get out of our area. We're trying to find a deer. That's what we do. I put a video of that group after they passed. We went back and glassed, and then we all three came over to that side of the hill. We were glassing about 2 hours later, and I saw off in the distance, I had more of a lead time. I saw a second group coming, same exact trail, dressed the same way with the same backpacks. And so we broke our tripods down, our guns off of bipods. We laid down flat in the deep grass so they couldn't see us. And we just laid flat and quiet and listened to them walk that trail 40 yards away. We could hear their tennis shoes on the gravel crunching on the way past us. And after they got past us, then we sat up, and then I went around the corner and videotaped the group moving off the hill and farther north. I put that on my Instagram account, and they got a lot of traffic, a lot of people interested in drug smugglers coming by when you're deer hunting.
Well, I've been in very similar situations, and you talk about the Border Patrol coming over and all the helicopters. I mean, there's been times where in South Texas, there's certain stands you can be at where you'll see 30, 40, 50 deer in a time. And then when you got three buddies that are all stretched out and kind of in a similar area and no one's seeing anything, you're like, what's happening? Then you get back to the house and you look up and there's 3 helicopters over there and you're like, oh, I know what was happening now. Okay. Yeah. Folks are coming through. And it's we're kind of through a corridor where they come through. I mean, and last time that I was out there, Border Patrol agent came through and I was talking to him about it, and he was saying that he's seeing groups of up to 100 right now. And it's almost like they get to a checkpoint, they send back notification that they've hit this particular waypoint, whatever it may be. It's maybe by a house or maybe by a corn feeder, whatever it is that it's hitting that spot. And then they're letting the group behind them, we made it. And he said the next 100 come through. And so it's kind of like with you, like having it's like this, this trail of folks.
It could have been that. Yeah, it could have been that checkpoints for sure. We hunted a junior hunt with my son once, and we were back in an area south of Tucson, and we came out, and one night we were just going back during the day, coming back. We weren't camping back there, but we were watching the news like on Sunday night when we came back from the weekend hunt, and 3 people have been executed right there where we were deer hunting on this peak that we weren't glassing because it was a little too far away to glass for deer, but it was right there where it was within view the whole time. And the backside of that peak up towards the top, 3 people were executed, shot in the back of the head. I don't know if they were border bandits that stole the drug load and killed them or what the deal was, but they said that the bodies have been in there about 2 days. And we had been hunting in there every day for the last 4 days. So we were in there. And actually one of the days we heard some shots going off, but a lot of times midday people go back to camp and they get their pistol out and they set something up and they shoot in camp just because they're out and they're having fun. And so I remember my son and he was working at Sportsman's Warehouse behind the gun counter. We were up there glassing for deer and we heard these 9mm, what we thought was like a pistol round, pop, 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 pop. And we were joking at the time about, oh, it sounds like probably a Glock 19, pretending like we could tell what kind of gun it was, just kind of goofing around. And that was about the time that those people were killed. And we would have heard gunshots on that hill where they were. We probably heard that happening when we were
Oh,
back there. And that was a junior hunt. I was back there with my kids. So there's, people tell me, is it dangerous to hunt down there? And I don't know. We haven't had a problem in 30 years, but you don't have a problem until you have a problem.
that's the thing. We didn't like our house used to get broken into a lot out there if there was a time when people weren't there. And we got family there a lot too, but even if they go into town, they know when folks are there or not. Like we're now seeing the same coyote. For those who don't know, it's basically he's the guy
Really?
who's bringing over the folks, and he's kind of leading that group or the guide, if you will. And we're seeing him walk around, and he's got a night vision goggle set on, and we're catching him in front of the same, and he almost has the same demeanor, the same camo stuff. He's got a vest on, and he'll look over, and it's like kind of like the little Sasquatch, sideways looking thing. But he's got the goggles on, and we're like, okay, we know you now. Like, and so like they're aware whenever maybe people are going out to hunt, they broke into our house, and my uncle showed up. It must have been right after, because he came into the house and the stove was still warm. They had broken in, and and it was like, we've now it's fortified in a sense that, but we weren't having any of those types of problems until we did. It was 20 something years between times when people would break in, and you know what they were getting? They were getting food, they were getting water. They're not destructing the place, they were using the restroom and things, but they're still, it's such a violation, and it makes me always feel uneasy. I mean, I was 10 years old walking around with the 22 and the whole, my whole ranch, 1,000+ acres. My parents trusted me with it. We didn't worry if there was people that were coming across. It was people that were, families, most of the time, that at least that of our awareness. And we didn't feel like worried about it. But now my almost 10-year-old daughter, it's like, you're not going to be 10 yards from me. Like,
Right. Right.
It's scary, and it changes the dynamics of like, maybe where you hunted or where I hunt. It's just you have to have a situational awareness of you around that almost puts you in that defensive state. Not like I'm not some, hero. I'm not going to try to confront anybody. I'm not going to try to, do anything stupid, but I'm definitely aware of my situation and my surroundings. Cause like you said, you don't know what you might be.
We had one of our officers that was shot, not shot, but shot at. Him and some other people were checking out a water tank, and they came over. They had quads, and they parked the quads, and they walked over the hill. There was about 3 kind of biologists from the BLM and from I think State Land Department, and him, who was one of our conservation officers. And they got over the hill, and they just bumped into a group that was down by the water, and one of them just emptied a 9mm up at the hill towards them, and he said there were bullets skipping off the gravel as they were running back to the quads to get back on. So you just you're fine until you're not, so you just got to be careful, keep your head on a swivel.
And I feel like that's almost, we talk about the percentage of hunters and non-hunters. I feel like there's a percentage of people a small percentage who understand and who really see the dynamics that are happening along the border, and most people don't. And they speak about it, but it's like, you don't really understand what's going on. You don't know what it feels like to have that kind of violation of all these people coming through your property and leaving trash, which then can affect the wildlife. And I mean, it's like, there's a constant cleanup. There's a constant amount of work on our places that we have to do. And it's, I mean, we have problems too. And I know that, we can talk about it a little bit later, but like the Meat Eater podcast. And, I know that, Steve Ranella had John Norris on there, and you may be familiar with him, and he's a former game warden, and he talks about how there's a cartel growth here and marijuana fields on a lot of state and national lands, and we have that in Texas too. I know it's a big problem in California, but it's an issue that the cartel has, whether it's people, whether it's drugs, or whether it's growing something here. It's something that folks they don't realize how big of an issue it is and how, dangerous it can be until you're there in that state.
Yeah. Yep.
When you mentioned, when you guys were hunting and you went back to camp, I was curious, like what does camp look like there? Do you have a particular area that you've kind of rented out for the weekend, or is it a spot that you guys are like, we're going to set up camp here yourself? What does that look like when you're hunting out there?
We're usually about an hour and a half from the place where we hunt, probably where we get out of the truck, and on the average. And so we've always gone down and day hunted down there. We've gone down for the day, we come back. It's a lot of driving, but when you've got kids and you're not sure about the safety down there. My dad, 89, be 90. We're just not going to throw some pads out on the desert and
Sure.
and sleep there. So we come back and sleep in our own beds normally for those hunts. For those in like a pronghorn hunt farther away from the house or an elk hunt up by Flagstaff, we've been getting Airbnbs, which is pretty nice. You can get set up and get everybody just spread out in the house with a fireplace and full kitchen, and that's a really nice way to go. I don't have a wall tent. I'm not set up for kind of cold weather camping, being in the desert for 30 years. And so Airbnb is cheaper than a wall tent for me.
Yeah, it's nice. There's, comforts, man. It's important. Yeah. And safety.
Yeah.
When you've kind of, you'd mentioned different places that you've kind of worked and you traveled around. And from my understanding, you worked at federal, state, local, private, I was kind of curious as far as like, what are some of those levels of the agencies you've worked at? And, if you can kind of give me a quick little kind of, breakdown of that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So after graduate school, I was the manager of wildlife operations for the ranch in South Texas. So, I got a good flavor, a good taste of what it's like to work for a private landowner. Like if you have to buy a tractor, you don't go out and get 3 bids and go through like a university purchasing. The millionaire goes, go buy a tractor, and you go buy a tractor, and that's kind of the way it is. So private was pretty interesting. And then went to I worked for a couple of universities as like Mississippi State University in the university setting, and been around the University of Arizona for over 25 years as kind of an adjunct faculty. My office is on campus now, so I have a lot of exposure working in the university kind of situation. And then also the BLM I worked for 4 months, so I got a feeling for what it was like I was talking about being a federal biologist. And then state agency for the last 21 years, and I really like state agency service just because you're managing the wildlife populations, not the habitat, not recreation, not visitors and all that stuff. You're managing wildlife populations. You're translocating, you're radio collaring, you're surveying, you're out there doing deer check stations and talking to hunters. That's what I enjoy. It's fun.
When you mentioned radio collaring and kind of tagging animals, I know what it is, but I don't know if all the listeners who as far as like, some people may think that, oh, well, this was an animal that was born in captivity and we're putting a radio collar on it and sending it out to the woods and such. And really that's not the case, because a lot of times those animals don't have the wherewithal to be able to have those survival skills and traits if they're kind of born in captivity. So can you talk to us a little bit about how maybe you go and get those transmitters on those deer?
Yeah. There's a lot more of it being done because the cost of collars is coming down, and the cost of captures and the efficiency and effectiveness of captures the cost is coming down. So we're learning a lot more about animal movements and animal mortality. But for example, a deer like in South Texas, when I was a graduate student, we would set up this long curtain net along a sendero or along a road, and then the helicopter would go out in the brush country, find a deer, and then just herd it into the net. The deer couldn't see the net until it was too late. It would think it was just crossing the road, and it would fly into a net, and the net would collapse on it. And then a bunch of graduate students and undergrad students would jump on it, and we put a radio collar on it. Nowadays, most people, I think in South Texas, and I know throughout the West, the net gun is the way to go, where they just take a helicopter up. They've got a guy that has a gun that shoots a .308 blank. So it's just the gunpowder, and it has 4 barrels on it. And the end of each one of those 4 barrels has a weight. And then that weight is attached to 4 corners of a net, and the net's just stuffed into a container in between those 4 barrels. So they fly over an animal, he shoots the gun, those 4 barrels shoot their 4 weights out, and those are the 4 corners of the net that it spreads out over the animal, the front end of the animal. It gets all balled up. We did that even back in the late 80s when I was in graduate school on the Zachary Rendado Ranch. I don't know if you know where that is. Al Brothers was a manager of that, and we were doing some research. And I broke my ankle on a net gun capture where they net gunned an animal. We were all in the bed of a pickup truck. We'd raced up to that animal or near it, and then we would all bail out of the back of the pickup truck and then run up the rest of the way to the animal. And I bailed out of the truck and caught my cowboy heel on the edge of the bed and came down sideways on the ankle and broke my ankle on that. And then 2 weeks later, we were doing a deer capture, and I had a walking cast covered with duct tape so those cactus spines wouldn't get in it. And I was walking with a cane from deer to deer processing. those. So the net gun has been a really efficient thing for pronghorn and really almost all animals in the open West. And they just throw a net over them, and then they'll have a mugging crew either on the ground, but more likely, because we're dealing with helicopters, in the helicopter in the back seat. And the helicopter will fly over, the gunner will net the animal, then the helicopter comes over and sets down, and the two people in the back bail out. Those are called the muggers, because they go over and mug the animal. They blindfold it, they put hobbles around the legs so it can't struggle. They start taking it out of the net because it's all tangled. And then they've got radio collars there that bolt onto the neck. And traditionally, radio collars have been a VHF signal, which stands for very high frequency. So they acted like the individual radio stations. So every radio collar would be like its own radio station on a different frequency. And then you had a receiver, and you could dial through those frequencies, just like your car radio. You dial through frequencies, and you could dial through the frequency and stop at each one of those frequencies and listen to those different radio collars, just like you would stop and listen to the different radio stations on different frequencies. And then we would traditionally, you'd have a directional antenna. So the antenna, when you pointed right at the collar, it was the loudest. And when you started moving it off a little bit, it was weaker. And so you could move the antenna back and forth and see what direction the animal was at. So if you stood at one intersection on the ranch and you got a compass direction, the deer's right in that direction. Then you drive around to another intersection of roads on the ranch that you know where that is, or now waypoints anywhere. And then you get another angle on that animal. And by triangulating, or where those two directions meet, that's where that animal is. And that's how we recorded animal locations for years. Now GPS technology has become so cheap. We have radio collars that have antennas on the back, GPS antennas on the back, GPS units in the radio collar with a battery to run it all. And then that animal will either record every 12 hours. You can set it to do it every hour, every 12 hours, every 24 hours. It'll record a waypoint of where that animal is on the planet. And some of those are called store on board, where they store those waypoints, and you've got to go back and recapture the animal, take the collar off, hook it up to your computer, and download all those waypoints, just like it was carrying a GPS unit around. But more and more now, we have these collars that communicate with satellites. And so, like, once a day, they'll do a data dump, and they'll dump all the waypoints they have for the last 24 hours up to the satellite, and then the satellite just goes to the website, and the biologist has these dots show up on their laptop in their office. So kids these days, they just sit on their laptop and look at all the dots on the map, and it's really cool. And we were out there standing on the back of trucks trying to get angles on the deer.
Yeah, they're not breaking their ankles at their office checking all the data, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, so I was kind of curious when you were talking about that. What is maybe the largest area covered that you've seen on some of these animals? I know folks who are saying, maybe a deer travels within this 3 square mile area, or definitely during rutting season it may expand. What kind of like range are you seeing on some of those animals?
Yeah, in Arizona, and some of the work that we've done in Arizona, most of the animals have year-round ranges because it's the desert. They're not going from snowy, they're not leaving the snow and going down to winter range and sagebrush. But in Wyoming, a lot of the work that they've done in Wyoming, they've documented the longest migration route in the lower 48. Alaska's got some giant migrations, but in lower 48, the longest migration, which is the Red Desert to Hoback in kind of southwestern, or at least western Wyoming. And those animals are going 170 miles from their winter range up to high elevation stuff where they're summering. And they track these animals moving back and forth. One individual animal that they had did that and then continued another 90 miles up into Idaho from southern Wyoming. It's just, when you look on the map, it's just bizarre that you've got a deer that's doing that. So she went up there, and then they thought, well, this is going to be really interesting. Was that just a bizarre movement of kind of a fluke, or is she going to come back? And so they waited anxiously to see if she was going to come all the way back to that winter range where she was collared, and her collar failed. And so they had no idea if that was just a bizarre dispersal and the collar failed, or whether she was going to actually come back in a seasonal movement. And so the next year they were capturing on that winter range, and they told the capture crew, just capture anything with a collar, because there's a chance it might be her. And they actually captured her back on that winter range. She came all the way back, and they put a new working collar on her. And then they've since about 4 years tracked her do that that migration.
She's got some relatives over there she's visiting for the winter, and
probably a little boyfriend on the side, maybe up there.
It's in Idaho. It's different. It's
yeah. That was pretty amazing.
Wow, man.
And we've had GPS. I don't know if it was GPS or if it was VHF, but years ago, someone came. It wasn't Arizona Game and Fish. Someone put a radio tag on a sandhill crane in southern Arizona, and it nested in Siberia. It flew all the way across North America, through Alaska, across the Bering Strait, and then just right there in Siberia, nested, and then came all the way back to southern Arizona.
That's
so
incredible.
you talk about animals moving, and birds are flying to South America all the time. Our passerine birds or our songbirds are going from North America down to South America. It's pretty amazing.
Wow, that is incredible. I was curious when you were talking about, these collars, they're definitely battery powered. And I know you mentioned that one that had failed. What's the longevity of those out in the field? Is that something that they have to capture these for every few years to kind of put in new batteries, or can they last for longer?
Usually like 3 to 5 years. And it all depends. Like if you have a GPS collar and you say, I want you to record a waypoint every hour, that uses battery life. A lot
of battery. Sure.
And so they can even get on a little spreadsheet and say, well, if I do it every hour, then how long will the battery last? Maybe 2 years. And then if I do it like every 24 hours, how long will it last? And it might be 4.5 years. So they can figure that out. They program all that in depending on what they want to do for the research.
What kind of data they're trying to get.
And what kind of data they need.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. Well, I guess it's kind of a transition here too. When you've talked about all of kind of the work you've done, and then I want to talk about your book, Deer of the Southwest, which is kind of behind me over here. But I got this book, and I feel it is one of the most quintessential reads for anybody who wants to learn more about deer. I've been thoroughly impressed how the comprehensive nature of this is just incredible. When did you first have this idea to write this book, and how long did it take to put that together? Tell me a little bit about that and kind of the process of getting this from idea to on the shelf.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, because it is Deer of the Southwest. So it's intended to be for southern Utah, southern Colorado, kind of the arid parts of those states, and then southern California down into Mexico. But it does have a lot of just really good, just deer biology information. But the reason for the book and why I thought I needed to put it together, and it took 12 years, by the way, 12 years, because I didn't just slap this together and I want to put out a book on deer and cranked it all together in about 3 years. Chapter by chapter and subject by subject, I explored everything I possibly could. I took way too long, really, to write it. And I was continually going back and updating the earlier parts of the book because 3-4 years have passed and new information came out. So it really took a long time. It wasn't a case of, hey, let's put a book out. I wanted to pull together all the information that was known at the time about cows, whitetail, and desert mule deer. And the reason for that was because there was no place to go for that kind of information. And all the information on cows, whitetail, and all the information on desert mule deer was in real obscure scientific reports or agency reports had information. There were things in Mexico that I had, some of it was in English, some of it was in Spanish, and I had some Mexican friends help me with translating it. So I pulled together all of that information that almost nobody had access to just because it was so scattered. And pulled it together subject by subject into one book. The idea being that you could look through that book and it wasn't full. It has citations, so you can go look at the research that's based on. But my plan was to provide something that anybody could sit down and read. And so as a scientist, you want to use all your technical jargon. There's all these cool words for all this stuff, and it's fun to use those cool words. And also you look really smart because you're using big words. Yes. I threw all that out and said, I want a book that people can actually read and enjoy the information without just being overwhelmed by a bunch of jargon that you can't understand or need to go look up. And so I think I succeeded in that, in a book that someone can sit down and read. I've got a friend from the shooting range that says, it's got all those big words in there, but I did my best to make it readable. Well,
you sent me to the dictionary a couple times on some things, and there's
I failed then.
There's just a few, and it may be just of my own educational nature. I needed to like, what is this word? But then there's some scientific things there too that I think you can explore some of your citations and sources of, you know, that's because anytime I read a book and I see something, I'm kind of like, oh, I'm going to go check out that book and kind of piggyback on there and learn a little bit more. So I had some interest that maybe some of the laymen may not want to go into. Yeah. But it was still it read very thoroughly, easily. I think anybody can pick it up. You know, it's not a scientific presentation paper. It is a book for everyone.
Written a lot of magazine articles, and so that that's always my focus, is to leave all of that technical stuff behind and just in plain words. There's a lot of interesting science that if you put it in plain words, people are fascinated by that. So that book had like a whole chapter on antlers, just because there's a lot of fascinating things going on in the antler world. But I have tables on all the information I could find about when the peak of rut is, how much deer weigh, all this kind of information that's just mostly buried in scatter reports, and pulled it all together. And it's been pretty popular. It was just printed for the third time. Reprinted for the third time out of Texas A&M University Press.
Nice. Congratulations. That's great, man. And now you got another book that you've been a part of that's coming out here in April, I believe, right?
In May 15th, we were shooting for, I think I saw their website said earlier in May, but May of this year. It's a giant book that will be the Bible for everything mule deer and black-tailed deer in North America. So it's 550 pages. It's got 23 chapters, and each of those chapters written by the experts in that topic or that geographic area. Got over 100 color photographs. It's got the information in there is based on the bibliography, or the literature cited has over 3,000 individual citations of information that's cited on. So there was a mule deer book that came out 40 years ago, and it was edited by Charlie Walmo. And that mule deer book for 40 years has been the Bible of mule deer. Mule deer biologists throughout the West, if they want to know something about mule deer, they always went and pulled Walmo off the shelf. I've got a couple of copies. I've got about 3 copies of it. I think it's probably out of view there. But that was the Bible. But it was 40 years ago. So almost everything is really out of date. And I chair a Western mule deer working group, which has, in Western North America, has one mule deer or black-tailed deer expert from 24 Western states or Canadian provinces and territories in Western North America. And so there's one expert, a mule deer expert from each of those jurisdictions. And we get together a couple times a year, and we work on continent-wide kind of mule deer conservation issues. And I've been the chair of that for 17 years. And through that, me and the other members of that working group and our collective friends in the mule deer world constitute everybody who knows anything about mule deer. And so we reached out to the experts of all of those topics to lead those chapters. And it's so much so that when the publisher wanted to find some mule deer experts to review the book, they couldn't, because everybody was involved in it. Everybody that was a mule deer expert was a co-author of something. And so they had trouble finding anybody that was like in the mule deer world that wasn't already a part of it. So it's going to be, it's called Ecology and Management of Black-tailed and Mule Deer of North America. So it's got like 7 chapters based on the different ecoregions in North America. So there's a whole chapter on the coastal rainforest and the blacktails there. There's a whole chapter on the Great Plains, mule deer in the Great Plains, whole chapter on the Southwest Desert. So there's 7 of those ecological areas that are written by biologists in that area that know about the ecology and management of mule deer and black-tailed deer in that area. And then there's a whole chapter on migration led by a whole bunch of migration experts led by Matt Kaufman, who's the one that's doing all of the Wyoming stuff that people hear about in the Wyoming Migration Initiative, and a chapter that I wrote with a geneticist that I've been working with for over 20 years, Emily Latch. And we wrote the first chapter, which was deer evolution, deer subspecies, and deer distribution. And I talk about some strange cases, like in the early 1900s when they brought a couple mule deer to New Zealand to see if they would take, and they never really took. And different places of odd distribution and translocations of mule deer to different areas. And so the book's just, it's a fascinating book. And when I was looking at the last of the page proofs before it went to publication, I just come away from that just kind of amazed at how cool it is. I'm really excited about it. Anybody that's interested in mule deer, that's going to be just an excellent resource. And it'll probably honestly be the last mule deer book like that ever, because 40 years from now, when this thing's obsolete, I don't think they're going to be publishing books in paper anymore. So it's probably going to be the Mule Deer Bible.
That's awesome.
Forever.
Well, I know what you're saying, man. I have a publishing company I started with my friend Harvey Arden that worked with National Geographic, and I think down here in the corner over me, you see some cardboard boxes. Those are the books that have successfully held up things for years. It is just slow getting those off the shelf, man.
Yeah.
Even if people really liked it, it's just it. You know, we have the ebook format now, and that's something that everyone kind of jumps to. Is that is that something that y'all are also going to have a digital version of this as well?
Yeah,
or is it strictly print?
Yeah. Those are things that the publisher decides, but that Mule Deer book will have a digital version of some kind, and I'm not sure how it's going to be marketed, but for sure. Yeah. And my Deer of the Southwest, I worked really hard to not put stuff in there that would be dated. I mean, I wrote that so that it wasn't like you could tell it ended on a certain year. And that has really held up really well. So much so that when we went to reprint it and I went through and looked for things that needed to be updated, there were a few things that were small things that need to be updated, but it holds up really well. And the Mule Deer book's going to be like that too.
That's excellent. Yeah, I was curious when you're talking about third printing, if there's different iterations and edits that have to be made, but it's great when you can be able to do something like that and have it stand alone. You know, I know that you do a lot of writing. I think over 300 different articles that you've written and different publications that you've worked with. One in particular that I know that you just put out was called In Defense of the Grip and Grin. And for those who are unfamiliar with that term, can you kind of maybe let people know and then discuss a little bit about what that article is? Because I think it kind of, you know, that there's some familiarity when you're talking about that, you know, 5% hunter, 95% non-hunting community, and how how it's important for us to recognize that as hunters. That well, if you can go ahead and explain, kind of, you know, I don't want to put words in your mouth there.
Yeah. The grip and grin is just kind of what people refer to as those pictures that we take when we're successful in our hunt, and we kneel down next to the animal, we hold the antlers up, and everybody's smiling. So you're standing there, you're gripping, and you're gripping the antlers, and you're grinning, or in the fishing world, you're gripping a bass and you're grinning. And I wrote that article because I was a little conflicted. I was starting to hear people talk about how we shouldn't do grip and grins. You should never do that because the non-hunting public sees that as some kind of domination of wildlife, and you're sitting there with a dead animal, and that seems off-putting to some people. And so I was hearing that, and then I feel like there's nothing wrong with you work so hard to get an animal, especially if you get a beautiful animal, and your friends, your family that's hunting with you, they're there, and everybody's elated and everybody's excited, and you just want to capture that moment with this beautiful animal and everybody that was hunting with you. And I didn't see anything wrong with that, and I really didn't like some people saying that should never be done, it should never be shared. And so I wanted to write an article defending the grip and grin, but there's a portion of that article, a big portion of the article, that acknowledges that we have to really be careful. It doesn't mean we can put whatever photos we want on Instagram, and if people don't like it, they can just keep scrolling. It doesn't work that way. When we're out on social media, you're out on the internet, you're representing hunters and hunting and what that is. And you encourage people, no bloody tongues hanging out, no blood on the side of the animal, not some deer thrown in the back of a pickup truck like a bunch of trash you're taking to the dump. Don't be sitting on the animal. You don't put hats and cigars and sunglasses on the animal. Respect the animal. Present these photos that you're going to share beyond your close circle of friends. You're going to put them on the internet. Make sure they're respectful and they reflect your respect for the animal and your reverence for the animal, and how appreciative you are that you're able to hunt. And think about someone who's never seen a dead animal before, or maybe they've only seen their dog dead and that was pretty traumatic, and they're scrolling and they see you with this dead animal. Think about what that looks like to them. And I had people comment to me on Instagram saying, well, they can just keep scrolling, or they shouldn't be on my site anyway. Well, that's not the way it works. They are on your site, and they're on your site to harvest some really gory pictures that they can use against you. And so we need to be aware of that, and we need to be respectful of the animals. I have some good friends that don't hunt that have told me, yeah, you know, I'm happy you guys go out and hunt. Looks like you have a great time with family. I know you eat the meat, and I support hunting 100%, they'll tell me. But it is a little odd that you're sitting there with a dead animal, like celebrating a dead animal. So I hear that from friends that I really like and really And so it makes me think that there's a lot of people like them that see those pictures and they feel that way. And even if we don't, because we grew up with it, we need to be sensitive to that. We need to be careful because, as you were saying, and as I said in that post, when you poll people in North America and ask if they support hunting, different studies all show about 77 to 81% of the general public in America supports legal hunting. And so we've got this like 80% of the public supporting something that 5% of us do. And it involves killing beautiful wildlife. Why do we have that much support from the general public for 5% of us to go out and kill beautiful animals? Well, the answer is because they know hunting is a positive force for conservation. And the minute they the general public stop seeing hunting as a positive force, we're going to lose it all. And there's a whole bunch of people trying to show that 80% of the public that hunting's a destructive force and that it's bad and it's gory. And the last thing we need to be doing is posting pictures on the World Wide Web, kind of supporting what they're trying to do, and that's to end hunting. So police yourselves. Think about what pictures you're sharing. You're not just pulling a little printout at work like people did in the 1970s before the internet and showing somebody at the water cooler. This is going everywhere, and there's tons of people that have had their careers ruined because they shared a picture of them with a dead animal. And just be careful of it. But it's nothing that we need to like hide from and not do. They're beautiful animals, and we're super happy that we were successful on the hunt. So I tried to kind of bring all of that nuance, both sides of that, and just have people think about it. Think about the grip and grin.
No, I think it's super important, and I know that you had listened to the, the podcast previous to this one that with my buddy Matthew Mitchell, we talk about that. And as far as like, when we take an animal, it's to maximize or rather when we take animals during hunting trips, it's to maximize the meat that we can have for our family and such too. And I think we probably put more pictures of our meals and our preparation or our reviews of other people's, meals, whether it's, Steve Rinella's cookbooks or Jesse Griffith's or different folks that we've, had associations with and things. And we're testing out this recipe and we're talking about this or that. And, or like your javelina recipe, you talked about like just different things I'm excited about trying or sharing with other people. And I like to make sure that I'm representing that. I like to share that personally, but I feel like that's a very good thing to show that it's like not just, hey, look at these antlers on the wall, look at this, animal that's in, on the side, of a dirt road from a ranch that we've shot. It's like, hey, this is what we actually do with it, and kind of representing that side of things and showing the respect for the animal, and because that's what it is to me. I was raised in a hunting environment, and it was about putting the meat on the table for the family. And 5 generations ago, that's when they fed all their workers. They would take a javelina out or whatever it is, and it was all about food and sustenance and sharing in that camaraderie. And it wasn't about trying to get the biggest of the best or being able to have the most inches on the wall, or it was really just about survival. And so I learned that kind of respect growing up. But I know a lot of people, they don't have that same awareness or kind of educational background in that kind of sense too. And I think it's important for us even to share this with other hunters and non-hunters alike, is like really kind of bring that to awareness. So I thought that was a wonderful article. I'm really glad you wrote that. Thank you for sharing that. I definitely pass that on to some folks too. It's really good. You've done some other, publications recently. Like I saw in the Journal of Texas Trophy Hunter, you had one about predators last month. I know I've got one coming up with Matthew Mitchell. It's called The Tale of Two Turkeys and the Gobblers They Got. So that'll be coming out here in a couple months.
Actually, my next article in Texas Trophy Hunters is going to just be a kind of a view of southwestern turkeys.
Is it really?
Turkey, the Rio Grande, Miriam's.
Is that going to be in one of the turkey editions coming out in the next couple months, or is this something that
probably about 4 months from now? I would think probably maybe the same issue, and maybe just to set it up on the issue before.
That'd be cool, man. It'd be neat to see our stuff in print next week.
Yeah, and I said before, I've always kept kind of one toe back in Texas when I left, because I've been in Arizona for 31 years. And Texas Trophy Hunter magazine, in the last 11 or 12 years, there isn't an issue that hasn't had a full feature article by me every over a decade. And I've been writing for probably 23 years for Texas Trophy Hunters.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, I see it often there too. So I was gonna all that to ask: is there other publications as well that you're writing for on a specific, month to month or bi-monthly basis that people can kind of look for?
Yeah, Mule Deer Foundation magazine is the only other one that I write consistently for, and being in the mule deer world like that, there's just a lot of mule deer content to provide. And so I wrote one recently that I thought was fun. It was on stotting, and stotting is that pogo stick like bouncing that mule deer do. When they get scared, they just go, all four hooves hit the ground at the same time, and they just bounce, boing, boing, boing. You can almost kind of hear them say boing, boing. And there's so I wrote an article about the science behind why they do that and what people have said about why mule deer do that. And articles like that are kind of fun because they're a little different. They're not something that people are normally going to read. But when you get into the science, it's kind of interesting. Like, why do they do that? There's some theories about them jumping up so they can see predators. There's theories about them jumping over boulders more efficiently than coyotes can do. And there's actually about 10 different theories, and I explored those and talked about why mule deer bounce like that.
Are you finding that there's some of those theories are more likely than others? Like, is there some that you could explain that? Because I'm curious about it too. I've seen that on videos, and it really is. For those, maybe I'll get like a little video and show here that it's incredible to see.
You would think that would be like a slow, and it's comical. You'd think it'd be kind of a slow and inefficient way, but actually over rough terrain, it's a pretty, if they get the forward motion going, it's pretty effective way to move. But some of the theories that make the most sense, and one of them is actually interesting, is that when they do that, they're showing the predator, I see you, don't bother. You're busted, basically, by jumping around like that. And the predator knows, all right, well, the gig is up. They know. And there's some evidence that supports that. Just the efficiency of the locomotion is another reason why that makes sense in rough terrain and moving through. There's a whole bunch of other theories that people have talked about that just don't seem to make sense. Even the rough terrain theory breaks down because a lot of African antelope will do that too, and they live on a tabletop. Right. And so the old theory from Valerius Geis and some other people was that they do that so they can move through rough terrain, but it's more complicated than that for sure. It's not that simple.
Oh man, look forward to reading that one. That's pretty cool. So I know you've done a lot of extensive work with a lot of different animals, and one in particular that I know you've done a lot of work with is the Mexican wolves. And from my understanding, they're the most endangered gray wolf species in North America. Is that still the case? Most
endangered gray wolf species in North America, but the red wolf is more endangered, and it's not technically a gray wolf. So the red wolf is in, and these get confused too. The red wolf is in South Carolina. It's a southeastern thing. It looks a lot like a really big coyote. The gray wolves are more of an old world European wolf species that came over into North America in the before the Pleistocene, or during the Pleistocene. And so Mexican wolves, the red wolf are really highly endangered. They're struggling because those red wolves will interbreed really easily with coyotes, and so that's like their biggest problem, is trying to keep them from interbreeding more with coyotes. There's been a lot of hybridization. With Mexican wolves, they're not interbreeding with coyotes. There's about, the last count, which was a year ago, they do a count every year. So last year, the last count was 196 wolves in Arizona and New Mexico, and that population has been growing since 2009 at a rate of about 13% per year. So it's a very successful recovery of a highly endangered southwestern form of the gray wolf. They're about 65% of the size of a northern wolf. They're genetically different. Ecologically, they're different. They evolved in Mexico, in the Sierra Madre of Mexico. So they evolved chasing cows, whitetail, Gould's turkeys, jackrabbits, a wider diversity of smaller prey, and the southern extent of the wolf distribution. Where you think on the opposite end of wolf distribution, Canada, they're eating moose and beavers. So bigger animals, a simpler system. And in Mexico, they had a wider variety. There really weren't elk in Mexico. So they're eating a wider variety of smaller prey species. And their historic range never went up past southern Arizona and southern New Mexico. There's some Mexican wolves that disperse into central Arizona and central New Mexico, and they interbred with the larger plains wolf that came down. But that wolf in New Mexico and in northern New Mexico and northern Arizona was larger. And everybody at the time talked about the big wolves and then these small Mexican wolves. So you're talking about a 13% growth per year. Is that something that is
a direct result of your genetic diversity infusion that you guys have been doing? And can you kind of talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. No, those are two different things. So they're growing what we say demographically, which just means, or numerically, they're just growing in numbers.
Right.
And so they're doing really well. And we have not seen any problems with genetic inbreeding in the Mexican wolf in the wild. There was a study with a smaller data set early on in Mexican wolf recovery that captive Mexican wolves, the more inbred they were, the lower the quality of sperm. They call it sperm motility, just the activity of the sperm cells. So the more inbred the males were, the lower the quality of sperm. But in the wild, we're seeing that population grow almost to the point of the growth rate in the early years of Yellowstone. It's a very successful recovery program. There's Mexican wolf and wolf advocates and protectionists that don't like the agencies. They don't like our plan because it's pragmatic, and the recovery plan was built with a lot of input from state agency biologists and stakeholders and everything. And some of the wolf advocates don't want that. They want to be able to control everything. They want to be able to decide what happens, and don't talk to hunters, don't talk to ranchers, don't talk to state biologists. And so they don't like the recovery program. And so they're constantly throwing barbs. They're constantly putting out newsletters about donate to us and help save the Mexican wolf from extinction. And when in reality, it's increasing pretty well. But we do worry a lot about genetic inbreeding because all Mexican wolves on the planet came from 7 individuals. They were extinct in the wild and only existed in a captive breeding program that originated from 7 individuals. So anytime you got that situation, you better be paying a lot of attention to maximizing the retention or retaining as much of that genetic diversity as you can. And in captivity, they've done a pretty good job of that because we don't have the problems that you may have heard about the Florida panther. They spiraled down to a small endangered population in southern Florida, and they had all these physical problems from inbreeding. They had kinked tails. They had like they call whirls in the hair, which was just like a swirl in the hair, which was an unusual thing. They had heart defects. They had all kinds of problems. And so they brought in some Texas mountain lions and infused a little genetic diversity into that Florida panther, and the Florida panther is doing much better now. They were in dire straits. The Mexican wolf population is growing, and there's no physical indications of genetic inbreeding. And so you'll have protectionist groups saying we need to mix them with other wolves to the north to improve their genetic diversity, and that genetic diversity is causing extinction of the Mexican wolf, and it's not true. Mexican wolves are doing really fine. And the bottom line is, sometimes when an animal goes down to what they call a bottleneck, where there's only like 7 individuals, and then the whole population expands from then, that bottleneck, sometimes during that bottleneck, you'll have some of those individuals that have some problem genes. And then when the population expands, those problem genes cause problems, like in the Florida panther. Sometimes you get a bottleneck like the Mexican wolves down to 7, and those 7 individuals are genetically pretty clean of those problem genes. And then when the population expands, they don't have any problems with genetic diversity. Even though they might have high inbreeding levels, they don't have any physical problems. And that seems to be the case with the Mexican wolf. And really, it's luck of the draw with what individuals go through that bottleneck. And I think we just lucked out with the Mexican wolf because we're not seeing those kind of genetic inbreeding problems. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to maximize genetic diversity. And that's why we're doing this cross-fostering, where we hand select genetically valuable pups, newborn pups in captivity. And more than that, we put males and females together in captivity to produce the most genetically valuable pups. And then we take those pups when they're only a few days old, and we fly them from the St. Louis Zoo or wherever that mother is, and we fly them out to the wild, and a team goes out into the wild using the GPS collar on a female of a wild pack that they know has just whelped her own pups, and they'll insert 2 or 3 of these genetically valuable pups into her litter. And since female wolves only have 4 fingers, they can only count to 4. And so they leave the den, they insert some more pups, and the mother comes back. She goes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, they're all here. But her litter just went from 5 to 8 because we inserted some more. And so she raises those captive pups from captivity that are super valuable genetically as if they were just wild pups. So they grow up not eating kibbles and bits out of a dog food bowl. They grow up like wild wolves, and they stay out of trouble. And we're not releasing, the advocacy groups want us to release 5 and 6-year-old adults that spent their whole life in a zoo and release them out into the wild thinking that those are going to be okay. Well, the last 9 adult wolves that we released from captivity, 8 of those failed. Either were killed, had to be brought back into captivity, or died. So we know that releasing adults is a failure, and yet advocacy groups keep calling for that. They keep saying that state agencies are obstructing what the scientists say really need to be done, and that is basically open the floodgates of the zoos, which is, it's just crazy. We're infusing genetic diversity using these inserted pups. And there's 4 genetic diversity metrics that we're monitoring in the wild population. 3 of those 4 metrics are improving. So we're measurably improving the wild genetics of the population. It's a great success, but you won't hear that from some of the protectionist groups.
No, they're ignoring the scientific data, which is clearly there. And if they read that in black and white, they'd understand what kind of benefits are happening. But for whatever, media spun reason of this or that, it's folks don't necessarily hear the whole truth, or oh, this is cruel. Well, is it? This is what's continuing the species. Mm-hmm. Or you might only see them in captivity, and eventually that may not be the case even. I mean, we have a species here in Texas, the ocelot, that lives along the border there too. Mm-hmm. And ocelots have very, very small, ranges now, basically due to all the development and such too. And mm-hmm. I don't really know the science of the numbers there too, but I kind of learned a little bit more. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Deep in the Heart.
I have, yep.
With Ben Masters. He's going to be a future podcast guest as well too.
And the American ocelot.
Yeah.
And Ben Masters did that too.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I'm just now kind of getting my head around all that too, and mm-hmm. It's incredible to know about that area. And well, there is a lot of inbreeding, and I was just I'm going to talk to him about that. What he's aware of as far as that. Mm-hmm. Is there any genetic infusing and different things there too to try to save the species? And I guess kind of a segue in that I was going to chat with you about too is in your book Deer of the Southwest, you talk about, like, in Mexico, the different agencies and how wildlife is managed there, or in some ways maybe not managed, mm-hmm. Depending on the areas and how you see it, and the collection of groups. Here we have a lot of local, we have county, we have state, we have national, and not that they're always going to be working together in puzzle piece formation and in the overall big picture, but in a lot of ways there is a lot of overlap of a lot of the designs that I see. But I was curious with the Mexican wolves, are you guys sharing data with folks in mm-hmm. Mexico, and is there like a correlation and collaboration going on there? Mm-hmm. Do you find that the agencies are working well together, or mm-hmm. how is that comparatively when you're talking about in your book, the book of the Deer of the Southwest? Yeah,
we're working very well together with Mexico. Some of the protectionist groups don't want us to collaborate with Mexico. 90% of the Mexican wolf historic range was in Mexico, and protectionist groups want all of Mexican wolf recovery in the U.S. Even though we only had 10% of their historical range, they want Mexican wolf recovery in central Arizona and New Mexico. They want it in the Grand Canyon, and they want it in the southern Rockies of southern Colorado. And they keep beating that drum, and that it doesn't make any sense. First of all, it's illegal. You can't recover endangered species north of their historic range unless you show that their historic range habitat is no longer suitable. And we teamed up with a team of Mexican friends and colleagues that were experts in that. And we did a habitat analysis of the historical range of the Mexican wolf. And there's tons and tons. There's 81,000 square kilometers of not just Mexican wolf habitat, but high quality Mexican wolf habitat in their historical range. And some of these groups don't want to hear that. Like, they stick their fingers in their ear and la, 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 because it's peer reviewed science. We published that paper, and it's clear that there's a bunch of habitat there. And so we collaborate well with Mexico, but that happens because we have really good personal relationships with some of the biologists, some of the professors in the university, and people that are working on the ground with Mexican wolves. There's also a wild population of Mexican wolves in Chihuahua. That's the second population of Mexican wolves. That's part of the recovery plan. It's all part of the recovery. And that population, they released the first wolves in 2011. They've released wolves actually almost every year since then. And that wolf recovery, we've had at least one pack that's had 5 consecutive litters in 5 consecutive years. There's radio-collared wolves. Carlos Lopez Gonzalez is a professor at the University of Querétaro, and he's got a team that's out there monitoring, working with landowners, and working on more releases and kind of managing the depredations for the local ranchers. And so it's a successful process. It's going slower in Mexico because there's a lot more challenges in Mexico, but we're working through the people that we know on the ground. I think probably half of my friends live in Mexico. I mean, the people that when I see have a funny meme and I want to send something funny to a friend, it's more often going to Mexico City than it is going to any place in the U.S. So we have these really good friendships, strong friendships with our Mexican colleagues. And we go to Mexico once or twice a year. Pre-COVID, it was once or twice a year. We've gone once or twice since COVID has kind of opened it up. I got COVID in Mexico City, second time I got COVID. and so we have these good relationships, and that's what makes it work. Lots of communication, lots of collaboration about what's going on. Mexico, in the recovery plan, it says there will be a minimum of 320 Mexican wolves in the U.S., and that's the population that we have now. That's almost 200. And then we have at least 200 wolves in Mexico, and that can be in one population or 2 populations. That's up to Mexico. No, U.S. isn't going to tell Mexico how to manage their portion of it. And so we've got these 40 wolves in northern Mexico and Chihuahua. There's a second area in Durango that's really good quality habitat. And so Mexico's looking at that second area for a next population. And what's exciting about the Durango area, not only is that Durango area and the Chihuahua area the 2 places where the last Mexican wolves were, so it was good habitat, but that Durango area, the primary agricultural production is not livestock, which is where all the conflicts come from.
Sure.
That primary agricultural production in that Durango area is timber harvest. So you have people that are mostly interested in harvesting timber, not growing cows. And that is one of the last areas where Mexican wolves are. So that holds a lot of promise for Mexican wolf recovery for a second very, very successful population in Mexico to contribute towards recovery. So I'm excited about the Durango.
That's great, man.
And we have a plan. We've got a plan written. The Mexican biologist wrote a plan about Durango. We went down to Mexico City. We were talking to high-level officials about the second release area. We've got support for them. Things are rolling to move towards that as we continue to provide resources to the existing population. We're not going to abandon that. We want to keep putting resources there. And if these advocacy groups would stop pouring their money into lawsuits and paying lawyers to try to keep all Mexican wolf recovery in the U.S. and instead use that same money to help promote real Mexican wolf recovery in the heart of their historic range where they evolved, we'd have a successful Mexican wolf program. But those groups are more interested in making money. Even I just saw a news release this morning where they said that the Mexican wolf recovery was occurring very, very, very slowly. They just don't want to admit that it's successful because who's going to donate to their emails that say, save the Mexican wolf if it's actually doing pretty well? It's got to be doing bad. They've got to talk about how the agencies are incompetent. They've got to talk about what a big failure it is. Otherwise, nobody's going to be writing checks and sending them tons of money.
Well, and ultimately, those checks that are sent to those groups probably don't find their way into the true recovery programs, I'm assuming, since it's
none of it. Zero amount.
What are they really doing, right? Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, that's sad, man. Well, I'm really happy to hear, the updates and the continuation of the success of the program and how that's moving through. I definitely will, maybe as that kind of, when they open up in the Durango area too, we can kind of chat again and hear more about it.
Yeah. And I saw there's a new group in Texas, something about Lobo in Texas. There's a new wolf group in Texas that is about 1.5 years old, promoting Mexican wolf recovery in Texas. And here's the deal with Mexican wolf. There were a few Mexican wolf specimens collected in West Texas, but if you look at the history of specimens there was a larger wolf in West Texas that was killed off. And people talked about this bigger wolf in West Texas. It was killed off. There was a decade or a couple decades with no wolves in West Texas. And then these 2 young Mexican wolves that they thought were litter mates showed up, and they were both trapped like 60 miles apart. And they felt that those were 2 litter mates that dispersed up from the Sierra Madre in Mexico, and they were trapped in West Texas. And then a third one that they thought was a Mexican wolf was trapped in West Texas. But there's this history of West Texas having not the Mexican wolf, but a larger wolf, having them all extirpated and killed off. some period of time with no wolves, and then a couple wolves coming from Mexico, Mexican wolves coming from Mexico. So whether I don't, that doesn't sound to me like Mexican wolves were native in West Texas. That's kind of a fringe area where they dispersed up historically. I'm sure they did, probably interbred with whatever wolves were in West Texas and the Davis Mountains, which is where one of the Mexican wolves was trapped. But it's really not what you would consider core Mexican wolf habitat, kind of a fringe dispersal area. So when people talk about bringing Mexican wolves back to West Texas, it's not really historically accurate. It's kind of a fringe area of intergrade.
When we have some other species that, come through Mexico too, like there's one, the jaguarundi, that, you see that more in South America, but there are evidences of in Texas. And in fact, about 15 years ago, I had a Weimaraner and we were walking around the ranch, and I looked up, and about 70 yards away, I saw a jaguarundi, and I had read reports of it, but I hadn't seen a picture at the time. But what I saw, I was like, clearly, immediately, I was like, I believe that's a jaguarundi. And we were upwind, and so it was stalking something, and it must have just crossed the sendero, the dirt road in front of us. And it was a good, maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 seconds where I saw it kind of crouch down. I mean, its tail was as long as its body. It was unidentifiably, it was not a house cat. It was something that would just blew me away. And we have a lot of bobcats out there, and there's some mountain lions that show up rarely, but that was something I could clearly, I went back up and looked up on my computer when we got back to the house, and it was definitely a jaguarundi. And my dad had seen two. As even as 4 or 5 years ago, another gentleman saw one on the property. So I've seen some.
Is this Central? Your ranch in Central, or
this is in Southwest Texas? There,
yeah, Southwest by Carrizo Springs.
Yep, right around there. Yep.
Yeah, because historically, when there were jaguarundis documented, I think the last one was in the 80s or something in extreme South Texas. That was that ocelot habitat in extreme South Texas. They certainly occur in Mexico. We were in Mexico once having dinner. It was in Querétaro, north of Mexico City, and we were on this open patio, and the researcher, who's Carlos Lopez Gonzalez, who runs the wolf program, he pointed to a hill, a heavily brush covered hill. He said, we've got a radio-collared jaguarundi on that hill right there, which is pretty cool because he's pointing to the hill where it was. So they're certainly down there in Mexico and not uncommon. South Texas was where they normally were in that brush country. Arizona, we get reports of jaguarundis all the time. There's never been a documented jaguarundi in Arizona, and also there's never been a documented jaguarundi even in Sonora to the south of Arizona. So we're pretty confident when people see jaguarundis in Arizona, that's not what they're seeing. I don't ever tell anybody they didn't see what they did. But that brush country and around Carrizo Springs, I don't keep track of jaguarundi sightings, so it's possible, but it's mostly a Rio Grande Valley stuff historically is where those jaguarundis were.
It's just something that I was pretty sure of what I saw, and then looking back up, I was like, everything, it matched the exact like details of what I had seen, and it was, then I was like, well, is this just a one-off thing? And then the fact that there was two of them seen together another time, and I've known some other people who have cited them. Of course, you see people that, I saw a black panther, it's like, there's so many sightings of all these animals. And, and there are animals that people have seen that have a melanistic, coloration to them that they may be mistaken. And, there is always the possibility that I was mistaken. And that's where I'm always, there's very few things are absolute. If I had a picture of it, if I had it on a game trail camera, that'd be one thing or another. And I'm a member of the Texas Hunting Forum, and there was a guy who was paying someone $1,000, a couple of years ago. I want a picture. I want a video. I want something that shows that there's a jaguarundi still in Texas, because we get reports of them, but the evidence is lacking. And I think we find that in a lot of places with a lot of different species all across the country, and it's like the people who see the black panthers running through, and it's like, you might have had a few too many whiskeys that night.
We have a lot of black panther sightings in Arizona, and people say, well, maybe it's a black jaguar, but the black jaguar phase is a jungle phase. It's an Amazon phase, and it's totally different. I don't think it's ever been found in the northern end of their range. Well, also, the local Sportsman's Warehouse has a black mountain lion that's mounted, a full body mount. And as a biologist, people say, well, maybe it was melanistic mountain lion, but there's never been a melanistic mountain lion ever documented, ever. And so I saw that mounted one, and I know the taxidermist, he's in town. So I called him up and I said, tell me the story about that black mountain lion, because that would be the first melanistic mountain lion ever that I've ever been able to determine. He said, yeah, we dyed it black for a conversation piece. We just thought it'd be cool to have a black mountain lion. So I almost thought I documented one, but I didn't.
It might have been the first dyed ever mountain lion.
It could be. It could be.
So it was the first of its kind, just in a different format.
Yeah.
Well, I saw a melanistic bobcat here in Texas a few years ago that a guy had shot, and he posted a picture. And it's just incredible that the idea of those color phases. Well, and I'd sent you the article about the melanistic deer that I had in the family ranch there. And I think maybe we can just kind of talk just very briefly about the different colorations of, especially with white-tailed deer. And if you wouldn't mind kind of leading that just real quick and kind of talking about a few differentiations.
I was going to send you an article I wrote about, I called it 50 Shades of Deer, I think, or something like that. And so, the melanistic is interesting. And I was fascinated to learn that your ranch is by that cluster of melanistic deer in Central Texas, because I've even written about that. And I'll have to go back and I'll send you the article about where, I forgot exactly where that was now. But
there's 7 counties that have more in those counties than the rest of the country combined.
That's amazing. And that's just an excess of melanin, the pigment that gets deposited everywhere. And there can be some variation. I saw a picture, and I wonder if I'll send you the picture. There's a picture of a woman that had a deer that was hanging. It was completely black, and the underside of his tail was white. Just really fascinating that the underside would be white.
I kept the tail, and I asked the taxidermist what we could do with it. And so he kind of made, it's kind of like a little handle that's like leather, and then I have the tail. So I had that saved because I was like, what can we do with this? And he's like, I got this little, this idea of almost like a little whip or something like that thing that he made. But the underside is white. It's the only spot on the entire deer that had that. It was fascinating.
So what makes the underside of the tail not have an excess of pigment and come out white like normal? That's really bizarre.
Because and for people that that's an alarm state. A lot of white-tailed deer, when they raise their tail up, and well, unless I'm speaking incorrectly,
no, you're right.
That's an alarm state. So it's kind of like, wait, is that something biologically to be able to keep that kind of alert, and warning others? Like it was bizarre because I had never seen it. We had a couple pictures, and I shot it. Whoa, what is this? It was amazing.
That is really cool. And that your friend let you saved it for you, right? Let you shoot it. That was incredible because to the part of the story that wasn't really gone into as much as we had a 12-point buck that had showed up, and I had kind of given all my friends that had hunted and worked on the property. I was like, yeah, if you guys see it, and he was like, are you sure that's like the largest deer that you've seen at either of your ranches, including South, Texas, where there's some giants? And I was like, no, man, like you've put, your blood, sweat, tears, sweat equity into the ranch. Like it's a mature deer. It fits like our management goals. It's like, you can go for it. And then I left that morning at like 4 a.m. I had my buddies come in from Boston. That's where I went to college. And so like one comes in from Massachusetts, one comes in from Jersey, one comes in from Canada. And every couple of years, like we go and we get together. And so we had to leave at like 4 a.m. because someone had like a 8 o'clock plane flight out of like Houston. So right before I left, I was kind of looking at some game trails and stuff and some cameras and SD cards. And I told him, I was like, okay, I just pulled these cards 4 days in a row. This thing shows up at like 7:19 a.m. at this particular spot. And he had like the worst morning in the world. Like the coffee pot, like wasn't sat right. So it like, it went had to clean everything up. And he like texted me at like 7:23 and he was like, you were wrong. It showed up at 7:21. But like clockwork. So he got that. Wow.
And this guy had never, ever even cleaned a deer on his own. Like a friend of ours, it was his first buck ever. Then I'll have to send you a picture of this, or I'll post it in here. It was a monster. And so a friend of ours had like shot a doe the day before and was like, hey, come here, see how I go ahead and process this. So, but he felt like when he saw that melanistic deer, he's just like, dude, there's no way I can shoot that. I've already taken the biggest buck ever seen maybe in this county. So it was all fair play there. And so it was a culmination of timelines that worked out. And it happened to be my very first deer that I'd ever taken on my family ranch, because
Oh,
in Southwest
wow.
Texas, they're so much bigger. It's like literally 50 pounds difference in mature deer. And I'd
Yeah.
always hunted there. And so I'd always let my in-laws and friends take the ones in Central Texas, because we had a limited number that we took. And so that was the first deer. And it happened to be on November 11th, which was, Veterans Day. And my grandfather bought the ranch. He was a veteran. No, I mean, you know the story, but just, it was really, a culmination of so many wonderful things. And to have my wife and my youngest there with me, it really meant a lot to me. And so that's,
That's neat.
it's that kind of that trophy. It's not that for me, it's like being able to look up there and I think about all the years and all the work we did, because we saw that, my wife and I, together when we first had our wild game biologist like out on the property, and like we saw it run by us, and so we knew we had melanistic deer, and so to finally have an interaction with one, it was incredible. But back to the, I'm sorry, that was a long turnaround to get back to like
that's interesting.
I wanted to hear about like also some of the other colorations, like, albinos and maybe piebalds, if you could explain some of the differentiation there too.
A lot of people see a white deer and they call it an albino, but there's really two kinds of pure white deer that you can get. And one is an albino, and that's the opposite of melanism. That's the complete lack of pigment. And so their eyes are pink. The antler velvet is white and pinkish, and the pink comes from blood vessels underneath the skin. Their hooves are pink, their noses are pink. Everything's pink on a true albino, and that's a recessive genetic condition, which means you've got two alleles, and you've always got a dominant allele. And if you got a normal color for a dominant allele, it takes over, and the deer just produces normal colored deer. But when you happen to get a combination where a deer gets that albino gene from a mother and albino gene from the father, and that's all it has, then it's an albino. So that's why it shows up just rarely, because in most of the cases that albino genes can be covered up by a normal color gene. And so that's a genetic condition. Leucism, an animal can be pure white and have regular dark hooves and black eyes and a normal nose even, and all of its fur can be white. And that's called leucistic, or a leucistic deer. And that's a genetic condition too, but it's different than albinism, or being an albino, where you do have pigment in those kind of structures, the eyes and inside the ears and in the hooves. And that's different from piebaldism, and which the animal looks kind of like a paint horse, or it's got blotches of white and blotches of normal color, and it can be mostly white or mostly dark. It can be normal colored with like a white forehead, and so it's also a genetic condition. It's a genetic condition that comes along. Piebaldism comes along with some other physical abnormalities. They can have a big Roman nose. They can have bowed legs. They have skeletal abnormalities. They have sometimes some other internal problems. So there's a lower survival of those animals with the piebald gene. But sometimes you've seen, even in Texas, even someone shot what they call the calico buck, which is a big piebald 8-point that they shot. So you get some that don't have too many of those other problems, and they grow to maturity and they show up in the harvest. Someone shoots one.
We had a piebald hen on our ranch. And that was, of course, in Central Texas and a lot of counties around there, you can only shoot gobblers. So it was just something that for like 4 years, I'd take my camera out there and snap photos, and it was just beautiful to see. And, obviously it's like, whoa, it stood out. And, so it was a neat thing to kind of try. I haven't seen it in the last 2 years. So my guess is it wasn't there, but it was something I had never seen in 20 something years over there. And then all of a sudden saw one, it's just one of those abnormalities that happens out there in nature, that it's just a cool circumstance.
It'd be interesting to see if some more pop up from
I'm keeping track, man. I've gotten more into turkey hunting in the years, and so I'm out there doing a lot more scouting and evaluation throughout the years. So I'm keeping my eyes open.
There's some other abnormalities that have to do with the coat color, and one is retaining fawn spots along the backbone. You can get a 2 or 3 year old deer that will have these spots that it just, for whatever reason, it holds on to them. And I don't think anybody really knows what the deal is there. There's also deer that will show up with a mane, like a horse mane on the back of the neck. And pronghorn antelope normally have a mane. Horses have a mane. Sometimes you'll get a deer that shows up with an actual mane on its back of a couple inches tall. And who knows what that is? It's some throwback from some old evolutionary gene or some abnormality that produces it.
Well, we have in that place where we have melanistic animals, or melanistic deer. There's a couple does that we have that have half of their face is black, just like the bottom half.
Really?
And then a black mohawk. Like, I mean, you sometimes have that darker line on the top of deer, but this one, it's like, so we call her stripe, think about the good gremlins, right? But that thing is, it is incredible. And I've been seeing her the same thing. There's no differentiation throughout the whole year when she sheds her coat. It's the same thing. And it's just one of the most bizarre things. There's obviously some melanistic, thing in part of her face and part of her coat. But it's the most bizarre. No one's seen her in person. We've always been, because she's been some that she's more in the mature age, but we've got tons of pictures throughout the years. I'll send you some.
I'd like to see pictures of that. That's really interesting.
I'll post some up on Instagram later on today and tag you in it so you can kind of check that out. But it's fascinating. I love all the colorations and different, abnormalities you see, and it's really neat, and it's very easy to identify that particular animal because I know what it is.
Weird.
Speaking of just making great memories and stuff, there are some, like, what are some of your fondest memories from doing all this work in the field? Is there some experiences or things you've been a part of, that maybe we haven't talked about yet, that you could kind of tell me about some of your favorite projects you've been involved in?
Well, I think I spent my first 23 years as a regional biologist, and so I was involved in so many things. We did annual bighorn sheep surveys where you're hanging out of an open door of a helicopter and you're flying by all these cliffs and you're classifying bighorn sheep, and all of the years of deer surveys. And I think that's really fun. It's super dangerous. We all biologists know people that were killed or injured in a helicopter crash. I don't think I had an Instagram post recently about the dangers of helicopter surveys and biologists, and people don't appreciate the danger that biologists put themselves in. And we've done a lot of that. We had one particular case where we had bighorn sheep that someone released 5,000 domestic goats near one of our desert bighorn sheep populations. The goats, of course, ran right up into the habitat and the cliffs with bighorn sheep, gave the wild bighorn sheep two different diseases, keratoconjunctivitis, which is pink eye, and also contagious ecthyma, which is a highly contagious virus that turns their whole mouth into a scabby, bloody mess. And so we had wild bighorn sheep with those two diseases. And this was in the winter of 03 and 04. And so we had a helicopter up, and we were locating these 6 sheep, jumping out of a helicopter. They were blind from the pink eye, completely blind, and then their muzzles were all bloody. And all of that stuff coming off the muzzles was highly infectious fluid that can infect other animals. So we were jumping. The helicopter would tow in, not even land, but tow in. We'd jump off a few feet. We'd go, and then he would come and hover over the blind bighorn sheep. And with that bighorn sheep, since it was blind, it couldn't see. And with the rotor wash above it, it couldn't hear us walking on gravel. It was just all noise, and the bushes were moving. And then we would sneak in, and we'd just grab the sheep and flip it over and bulldog it and get it down. And then we would give it antibiotics that would help with some of the pink eye, because that's a bacterial thing. We give it antibiotic eye ointment to try to solve that blindness and start healing the eyes. And then we had what we thought was a vaccine from the contagious ecthyma. I don't know how effective that was, but we were working with a vet. The vet was telling us what to do. So we were capturing these sheep by hand, medicating them and letting them go. And I think we still lost a lot of bighorn sheep, but I think we saved a good portion of that population from about half of them got killed by mountain lions because they're walking around blind in circles and blind. And so they're getting ambushed. And so we saw that. But then I was in between these captures, which were every 2 weeks. I was back in my office and I noticed a big blister on my wrist. And we had flight suits and rubber gloves, but that part right there was exposed between the rubber glove and the flight suit. I saw a blister, and I had been researching this contagious ecthyma disease a lot to learn more about it. And there's a human form. Humans can get it. And the human form is called ORF, O-R-F. And it was known with the old Basque sheep herders that lived with the sheep. They would get this contagious ecthyma once in a while. And so as soon as I saw a blister, I knew exactly what it was. So there was a new research paper that was just published about the history of this disease in humans. And it's not any problem. It just, you cover it up and then it just goes away and whatever. You probably get tighter so you're not susceptible to it, but it's not any really human health issue. But you still don't want to tell people that you caught a disease from a sheep. That's kind of embarrassing. So I went into my doctor and I brought this research paper and I told him, this is what it is. This is what I've been doing. And he thought that was fascinating because he had never seen it before as a doctor. And he said, can I copy this paper? And I said, no, it's your copy. I brought you that copy. And he said, wow, I should probably pay you the copay. This was really interesting that I get to see that. And then there's a graduate student working with us who also caught it on the back of his hand. And he went since he was a student, he went to the university hospital. And at the university hospital, they called down the infectious disease expert from upstairs. He looked at it and he said, follow me. And he dragged the graduate student up to the 4th floor where they were having a conference on infectious diseases. And he put him in front of the room and had everybody try to guess, here's what he's been doing. Here's what he's in contact with. Now, what's he have? And turned into a question answer thing. And then they actually published a 2-part question answer thing in the Journal of Virology where they showed the picture, they showed what he had been doing, and then in the next issue, they told, you're supposed to guess what it was. They would tell what it was. So he was part of that. So he got a publication out of it as a graduate student. So that was an exciting and rewarding kind of situation. There was several times where I was sneaking up to like a bighorn sheep ram, and the ram was blind, so he didn't know, but he was running, and you get a full force of a bighorn sheep in your chest. And then try to bulldog him as he comes over the top of you. And so there's some exciting times whenever you're in close contact with big animals like that.
Wow, I can imagine. I mean, that sounds like quite a close encounter. I was going to ask if there's any other things that that you had some close encounters or some uncomfortable moments with wildlife, but I know that's one there. Is there any other ones that you kind of piggyback on that one?
I got a long list of rattlesnake encounters, as we all do, right? That spend time with rattlesnake. Some really scary one. We were deer hunting once in November and it was cold, and my dad and I walked up on this volcanic hill in the dark, and we put our little seats down. I sat down on a rock. I had a little bush next to me. We were sitting on the hillside waiting for it to get daylight, and it started getting daylight, and I had thrown my pack off behind me, and I started hearing this air hissing. This long hissing noise, like something was leaking, like an air mattress or something was leaking. And I had the binoculars in front of me and I was starting to glass. I'm trying to think, what do I have in my pack behind me that's leaking air? But I had nothing. I don't have a can of soda. I don't have anything that's inflated. And this hissing kept continuing, this long drawn out hiss. And somehow I looked underneath my elbow, and I'm sitting on an incline on a little rock on a pad. And there's this little bush, and there's a diamondback that's about 4 inches underneath my elbow. And I'm sitting there, and the only thing that saved me is how cold it was, because it was cold and he couldn't muster up enough to rattle or even strike. But he was about 4 inches underneath my elbow, and I'm an hour and a half walk to the truck and an hour and a half drive to a hospital, that's pretty serious.
That's a long time.
Especially if you happen to get hit. He was a couple inches from the side of my ribs too. If you get hit in the body, that goes right into your bloodstream. So I jumped up. I said, probably the only time I said a 4-letter word in front of my dad, it was just kind of reactive. I jumped up, turned around, and I took a picture of my cushion and this rattlesnake coiled up right next to my cushion underneath my elbow. And that's really scary when you think about how close I was to a really serious medical situation.
Do you still have that picture?
Yeah.
You got to send that to me. I'll put it up here.
I don't think that's going to be, I don't know if I put that on Instagram or not, but I can send you that. Yeah.
Wow, man. I mean, we've had some close encounters, or going to like get some quail or some dove and stepping over a cactus and your foot's almost on the ground, and you somehow like I think I beat Carl Lewis in the long jump backwards. And it's it's like a 5 or 6 footer. I mean, we just this last trip there, we saw some an indigo that was probably about 6 feet, and I've seen one out there that was about 10 foot long. I thought an oil guy had left some pipe off, and then all of a sudden
I had the same experience. They're the longest snake in North America, and one time I thought there was an oil pipe across the road, and then the end of the pipe started like disappearing off the road. They are huge. They're cool snakes, though. They eat rattlesnakes.
Amazing. Yeah, we had. There's a picture of this. I forgot the guy who is a friend of ours who had the pictures of the series of as the indigo was like eating the rattlesnake, and because I'd heard that, but I had never seen any kind of evidence until then, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so that one that was over, it was right by our house, and it's just like, yep, it stays here. There's a lot of critters that
Yep.
We just love having around, and that's one of them. It's like, keep the snakes
J.
away
Frank
from the house.
Dobie from South Texas, the writer from South Texas, J. Frank Dobie, wrote a story about 2 rattlesnakes that were eating each other, and they disappeared.
So he wrote a book about black cowboys in Texas here.
Oh, really?
I'm trying to remember the name of it, but in it, he talked about a guy named Bob Lemons.
Yeah.
And how he was the original Mustanger. So he called him the most original Mustanger. So there, in the book that I'm working on about Bob Lemons, there's a lot of Adobe references and quotes, because he actually came out to the ranch, and is when Bob Lemons was in his elder years. The last 15 years of his life, he was going blind, and then had finally gone blind. And he had a house that was about 100 yards from my family's ranch house, and they had a slick wire. And so he would walk over to the house and eat with us and stuff, and go, nighttime, he'd go back to his place. But Dobie came out there, and they had some people from U.S. Library of Congress went and took some photos of Bob and stuff too. I'll send you some of those too. There's been one that's been recolorized and such too. That'll be the cover of the book. And my mom did her master's paper on Bob, and our whole family has tons of stories there too. But yeah, Dobie came on out to the ranch and interviewed him and talked to them about it. And that was part of his, I think it was called The Black Cowboys of Texas, might have been, or maybe it was a portion of the book. But that is so cool. The snakes disappeared. I love it.
Yeah, poof.
You know that there's people are listening. How did that happen?
I know. Well, you think about it, they would have to disappear, right?
Of course, there's nothing else that can happen. Oh, speaking of good folks and good times, I know that you've had a lot of contributions and times with the Meat Eater, podcast, and Steve Ranella there too. He actually, I know that he calls you the smartest man on the planet regarding your extensive knowledge of deer, wildlife biology, management.
I heard that.
I was just curious how you first, and I can imagine with all the different things that you and he have done together, and there's got to be some, cross, correlation of events and things you might have spoken at. But how did you first meet him, and how did you kind of become one of the 2 most mentioned names aside Doug Duran on the actual podcast?
Yeah, I was listening to that podcast, and I heard Steve say, "Man, he's the smartest man on the planet." And I thought, "Oh no, I'm going to hear about this." Sure enough, I heard it from my son Levi's wife, who sent me a text and said, "Please."
You're like, "Yes, it's been quoted on national
you heard it
podcast. It is true."
You heard it here. Yeah, that's funny. But he did, if you listen to enough podcasts, he called me a dumbass from time to time too. So it evens out, I guess. Maybe I'm average. I'm of average intellect, maybe.
There you go.
After all that,
a little bit of each.
Yeah. Well, I was listening to Meat Eater podcasts, and because of Steve's interest in archaeology and paleontology, and we just have a lot of crossover, a lot of mutual interests in topics. And so I would hear things on the podcast, and I would send him. I said, "Well, yeah, you talked about this, and you said you weren't sure about it. Well, here's this new scientific paper that talks about, either supports exactly what you were saying, or here's an article, or here's a scientific paper that shows that what you said was wrong." And it was never like people that get that well known. For some reason, other people like to complain about them and chew on them. You should see the nasty comments, even on Instagram, like, "Oh yeah, well, you don't know what you're talking about." I don't know why that is. If people feel better because they can point out some error. And I was never that way. I was always just like, "Hey, I thought you'd be interested in this. And hey, you talked about this and you said this, and that's not quite right. And here's why it's not right." But it was never in aha, gotcha, aha, right. No more than you.
It's about education.
I'm helping you with some background information. I was always that way. And so he started, we started corresponding, and then I sent him all kinds of stuff. And I'm just interested in a lot of strange, goofy stuff. And I've been around long enough to have amassed a lot of kind of interesting stuff and interesting knowledge, because I've always been interested. And so we just started corresponding like that. And then he had me on the podcast for the first time right before COVID broke. It was like February of 2020, I think. And we just did a 2-hour thing. It's the episode's called Deer Nut. And we just talked about the interesting deer stuff, and we just continued to correspond. And he'll send me text messages and say, I'm gonna post this, is this right, or does this sound right? Or someone will write in and they'll send it to me and say, what do you think of this? And I'll just provide my input. And I think one of the things that has made that relationship good is I'm not a BSer. I'm not gonna pretend I know something I don't know. If they ask me something I don't know, I don't like pretend like, oh, I'm the expert. I got to come up with an answer. I say I don't know. I don't do that. In fact, Steve called me one time and wanted me to come on the podcast and talk about red wolves. And I'm not an expert in red wolves. I deal with Mexican wolves, and I could study up and try to be a poser and try to provide information. But I told them I'm not a red wolf person, and not only that, there's some people that know a lot about red wolves, and so you owe it to your audience.
Call them, right?
To have the experts on that know this, instead of me pretending like, because I deal with this wolf, pretending like I know about red wolves. And in fact, one of the people who is an expert on red wolves is someone he's had on the podcast, the Turkey Doc, Mike Chamberlain, quite a bit. So I turned him on to Mike Chamberlain and told him he's had some graduate students that worked on red wolves. And I told Steve, I said, I know a lot of things about a lot of things, and that ain't one of them. And Steve ended up on the podcast saying that. And that really epitomizes kind of my relationship, is that I've never tried to pretend like the expert. If I don't know something, I don't know it. And I'm comfortable with that. I don't care. I don't know everything.
I think that's something that a lot of folks get later in age. I mean, I remember I always wanted to be the person who had all the answers, growing up. And it's like, I don't care. And if I don't know, it's so easy to just be like, yeah, nope, go find out elsewhere, because I don't know the answer. Or especially when it's like about like wildlife or something that's like on our ranch, someone's like, oh, tell me about this bird. I don't know. Let's actually go find out together. And like, now that I have kids, that's something that is also very, all the questions that come, from the mouth of babes, right? It's like, I don't know that, but we're going to find out. And it's like, then you can kind of teach them to be able to teach themselves and things too. And it just kind of that it's something that evolution of your thoughts and things too, that I find it's not only on maybe in a biological level or wildlife level, it just happens I think that's a great thing when people can do that. And being able to also, in Steve's case and, in other folks' cases, like being able to ignore all that, that the static of people who are, I think it was like Joe Rogan who talked about it. He's like, if you focus on any of that, it takes away from like what you can give to your family and to like all the other, like there's going to be so many people that want to knock you down a peg and they want to like chip away. And it's like, they're taking away a piece of your time or a piece of who you are. You got to ignore that crap. And, it's like, if someone comes up with something that's factual, it's like, hey, this is against what you just said. It's like, I will, I reserve the right to change my opinion. I forgot who had said that, but like, that's a very important thing, it's like,
there was a famous ornithologist that once said, I'd rather be right than consistent. So he didn't mind at all changing, how he felt about something. He'd rather be right than consistent. And that's something I think about a lot. I don't mind changing my opinion on a lot of things.
Yeah, it's the older I get, sometimes the less I know. It's like,
and I use that a lot. I use that a lot. That let's go find out together. And I'll do that if Steve or someone from Meat Eater asks me a question and I don't know, I'll do some looking in with some of the resources I have, and then I don't come back like the expert. I say, hey, I looked into it. This is what I found. Let's look at it together. Basically, we'll learn together what it's like.
And I think this may be a good kind of time to talk about this and maybe kind of wrap some things up. And when you're talking about finding things out and what it is that you can kind of learn is like throughout your experience and your time and working in your fields and as I know you said you had 4 sons, and I was just kind of curious, like, what is it that you particularly want to leave behind as your legacy? Is it, it could be academic, it could be family wise, it could be the combination of all those, but it's something that, I asked Doug Durham when he was on, and it's something that I really want to ask folks who have kind of made some, I think, significant contributions. And as you have, as an author, as a wild game biologist, as, as a writer, as an intellectual. And I know that there's a lot of things I could guess at, but I'd like to hear from you what you really kind of think of as your legacy.
I think first and foremost is 4 boys. My wife and I had 4 boys. She used to work at the University of Arizona Vet Diagnostic Lab, and when we had our 3rd boy, daycare was more expensive than what she was making, even though she wasn't making. She was making pretty good money, and so she stayed home. And together we raised all 4 boys, but she was a stay-at-home mom, and she was on top of everything. I mean, she just the glue that held the whole family together. And I was always really active in all of that too. And so together, I think I think the greatest legacy is 4 really good young men that are great citizens, conscientious. Um, Youngest one got a speeding ticket the other day, so we were dealing with that. But that's minor stuff compared to what can happen when you raise 4 boys. So
Sure.
I like to think that that's my magnum opus, that's my legacy done in combination with her. Beyond that, I've left a lot of. I left like I'm not here anymore, but I've left a trail of a lot of writing. Some of it, not that good. Some of it, I think, in my opinion, is really good. Some of it I really like myself, and I'm really proud of. And I think a lot of, like, my sons don't read a lot of what I write, because my oldest one, Levi, just got a PhD in wildlife, so he's a wildlife biologist in Texas, actually. And the other ones are not in wildlife, so they don't read a lot of the stuff that I write about antlers and genetics and all that stuff. But I think not only my sons, but other people down the road, even if I'm not here, are going to run into a lot of my writing. And some of it they're going to go, that wasn't that good. That's kind of crappy. And some of it they're going to say, wow, this is really interesting. And this is something that you just don't see anyplace else. And this is like a lot of really interesting facts. This is fascinating. I think a long time from now, people are going to run into some of my writings and be impressed with some of it.
Well, I know I'm impressed with it now, and I think those are wonderful answers. I think family is always a huge part of legacy, and it's wonderful to hear about your, 4 amazing kids, and I know you're proud of them, and that's a wonderful thing. Before we leave, I had 2 other quick questions. I was going to ask you about like where people can find you, and I know one of the answers is Instagram, but I think a precursor question to that is you've had to have a new Instagram handle.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about that before you tell us about your new one?
Yeah, I was banished from Instagram, and I was posting a lot on Instagram, and as we talked about, one thing I do is competitive pistol shooting, and the stuff I was publishing was not controversial. It was not inappropriate. It was just kind of wildlife information, sometimes goofy memes and things. And then we had a pistol match, a special memorial pistol match for a friend of mine who died of stomach cancer. And he was a U.S. Marshal in the Tucson area. And he had done some really, really interesting things. He was on Texas Ranger with Chuck Norris. He was on an episode of that where he played a U.S. Marshal. And when Chuck Norris kicked the snot out of the bad guy at the end of the movie, he was the one that grabbed him and handcuffed him and hauled him off. So he did some really cool stuff. He did some undercover work in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And he was really an interesting guy and just a class guy, man, like really nice guy. So we had this memorial match. His name was Ray Kondo. And he was in law enforcement his whole life. His dad had a little store in El Paso, and his dad used to give him a quarter for every shoplifter he caught. And that was the beginning of his law enforcement career.
Yeah. Get paid for this.
And he was shot by a sniper in South America. They were trying to go get a guy, and someone sniped him from a side building. So fascinating guy. And we shot pistol matches together all the time. So super guy. So he died. We had a memorial match for him, a pistol match, and I posted on Instagram all of those videos of that pistol match. One of them had like a target close up where it looked kind of violent. Like if you had an algorithm looking for like firsthand shooting stuff, it would probably pick it up. So I was convinced this all is going down a rabbit hole because that turned out not to be the issue. But I was convinced that this was shooting related. There had been a school shooting about that time, and I thought, Instagram's got some algorithm. They picked up me shooting and they just banned it. And I filed appeals to find out why it was banned. And I've got no response, absolutely no response at all.
And because at this time they've shut off your account, you have no access to it.
Just shut off the account.
It disappears.
Yeah. I have the app on my phone and I click on it and it says, this account has been disabled. That's it. And that was all I could find out. And you can't just pick up the phone and call Instagram and say, hey, what's the deal?
Right.
They've got 1 billion users worldwide. There's like nobody in charge anymore. It's all bots and algorithms, right? I think, running everything. So I waited like a month and a half, kept trying to log in, kept trying to get an answer. So I just gave up, started a new Instagram account, which is Cervidnut, Cervidnut. A cervid is any member of the deer family, which is called Cervidae. So it's Cervidnut. So I started a new one. I went on Meat Eater shortly after that and about tripled or quadrupled the number of followers that I had on the original account. But in being on Meat Eater and talking about being banned from Instagram with no recourse, one of the listeners contacted me and said his wife works at Meta, which is the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, and she's looking into it to see why you were banned. And I said, oh, cool. And so they got back with me, and she said, I couldn't determine why you were banned, but I did determine that it didn't come from the inappropriate. There's a whole division that deals with inappropriate content, that which would be related to gun stuff and violence. It came from the division that was copyright and trademark infringement. And when I had my logo for my original account, which was Jim Deere, it was Jim Deere, and it was spelt like John Deere with an E at the end. And so I had the John Deere logo that I photoshopped to be a mule deer instead of a white-tailed deer. And then it said Jim Deere underneath it instead of John Deere. So I thought it was pretty funny, and it was pretty funny because it was a little mule deer. But somehow I think an algorithm, it sounds like, snagged that as copyright or trademark infringement, and for whatever reason wouldn't allow me any recourse to change the logo or anything. It just banned from Instagram. But I'm in a good place. I'm in a good place now. I think I've got over 17,000 followers. I only had about 4,000 before, so
maybe
I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. Yeah, it worked out okay.
So yeah, I'll put it down here, but it's at Served Nut, and that's it, the Instagram handle. What are some of the other handles? I know you have your own website, and how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, but I mostly keep that to family, so that's not really. I mean, I don't put anything on Facebook that's not on Instagram, so nobody's missing anything anyway. But my website is deernut.com, DEERNUT.com, and I just completely revamped that about 6 months ago. And I basically threw away my old site and just started from scratch into a more appealing site with a whole bunch of stuff, including podcasts and video appearances. A lot, I would say most of my magazine articles are just there free as PDFs. You can just download them and read them. I sell my book, Deer of the Southwest, on there. There's a little bit about me and some other information on there. So you can check out the website. So it's really Instagram, deernut.com, and Instagram is servednut.
Well, I definitely encourage everybody to go check out your pages there. Your website's fascinating. I've done some deep diving and checking out all the different podcasts and videos and your articles. It's just a tremendous amount of wonderful information, very educational spot. And Jim, I really want to thank you for coming on today. It's been just a sheer pleasure to get to know you and to chat with you today. And looking forward to maybe someday having you again on if you have some other things you want to, maybe when your book comes, the next books that's coming out. And if you can just remind everybody the name of that book and where they can, where they'll be able to find that when it comes out. Yeah,
in May will be the release of Ecology and Management of Black-tailed and Mule Deer of North America, and that comes from the publisher is CRC Press. There's a Taylor Francis publication is usually the website it's on, but if you just Google Ecology and Management of Mule Deer and Black-tailed Deer, it'll come up. You can come up with a link, and there's a spot there where you can pre-order after April 15th. I think you can start pre-ordering it. So it has an online presence already as a placeholder for this book coming out, so you can find that and then just track it and see when it's available.
Great, man. Well, I've got my reminder set. I'm definitely going to be pre-ordering that right off the bat. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I love the South Texas connection, be able to talk about South Texas, talk about Meat Eater, talk about a lot of different things that my career and my life touches. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you once again. And, I hope you have a great rest of the week. And we'll definitely be putting all the links and everything for people to come check out your stuff. Good. Thanks. Yeah, you're welcome. Take care.